What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome all to episode 6 of my Nano Reef Journey. Today is an exciting day. Today we get wet, baby. Let's do it. We got a bunch of items on the we have the tank ready to go. Last week we did all this. I think it was Friday. We put the sand in there. We put all the rocks. We've done all the aquascape. I added one more little rock over here. You can't see it, but I'll show you later. We put the pump and we assembled the whole entire tank. And then I put some RO water in the sand in hopes to keep the, I don't know, the bacteria in there alive, because supposedly it's like live sand. So hopefully that goes good. But today what I don't know what I plan on doing anyway is I plan on using some of this tropic marine salt, mixing it up in buckets, and kind of getting that going. I think it's gonna take me all night. I don't know if you ever mix salt in a bucket, but it takes a long time for it to dissolve, and I'm planning on doing like 15 gallons. So figure each 5 gallons is gonna take me like, at least half an hour. What I plan on doing then is I plan on listening to BRS, the Worldwide Coral playlist. They have it's like a video where they partner with Worldwide Coral and they kind of talk about Worldwide Coral's like big ass tanks, and then they break down what they were doing and what they're doing right, and then they're gonna adapt those things to like the home aquarium. Right now I'm on episode 3, which I think is talking about one of their bigger tanks. It's like a 10-foot long tank. It's like massive. So we'll do that. Let me see if I can get my image up. Still like this. Boom. Right in here. No. Right in here. There you go. I'm gonna do something like that. You guys seen that? There you go. That's better. Let me turn off the music. I'm gonna leave it up like that. For this. Boom. Let's see how that goes. Make sure you guys can hear this. Nope.
Very similar to what we have on the 900 is 6 of the Gen 4 Pros, also in conjunction with 2 rows of
that way now we
Blue Plus.
We kind of all sound the same now.
The lights are oriented from front to back on the tank as opposed to side like we saw on the 900. So these lights are actually spaced about the same as the 900, maybe a little bit closer.
I also got this little wireless mic, so you should be able to hear me better up here too.
And we run a very similar intensity, but the schedule is the same.
So Josh, I think it's important to note that these are mounted 24 inches, which is a bit higher than what most hobbyists would do. Why is that?
Like we discussed with the 900,
I gotta put away all this stuff. Hold on, give me a second.
It allows for us to get in underneath the lights. It's a whole lot easier to work on the tank and not splash water. It's a more even distribution of intensity across the water when we do raise them up a little bit higher. If we were to lower the lights, it would take a few extra XR30s.
So the Radions provide a lot of power, but still you're using T5s to supplement this tank as well. Why is that?
By eliminating the shaded areas with the use of T5s, we have a whole lot more space so we can place corals beneath acropore colonies, especially when they do get big.
So in the 900-gallon tank, we had a PAR range around 80 to 350. What do you suppose the PAR is in this one?
So we haven't used a PAR meter in this tank. I would imagine it's probably higher, maybe 15, maybe 20%. But I do know that some of the corals definitely show a better response to the amount of light that is there. So over many months, we've acclimated this tank to a higher amount of light than what it was formerly used to. Some corals liked it, some corals didn't. I think it's important to note that these corals are from all different parts of the ocean, and we can't keep them in the same exact environment. So when we have higher lighting scenarios, there's going to be a lot of coral that don't appreciate it. For those corals, we'll find them a different home. They don't need to be in the top of the tank with the corals that do like it.
So moving on to the final element of reef tank biology with nutrients, I imagine you're feeding this tank with the same fish blend that you use for the 900 on an hourly basis. So how does this tank keep up with nitrates and phosphates?
This tank runs at the same 20 parts per million of nitrate. The phosphate, however, if we're not being careful, will rise above our recommended range of 0.1. It's probably due to the size of the fish and the bioload that it carries, which is why we have an action plan for our phosphate removal, where we'll actually use brightwall phosphate 8 at least 3 times a month to maintain that level of acceptable phosphate.
So remember that we talked about flow being the lifeblood of the filtration system. What are you guys using for flow on this 500-gallon reef?
On this tank, we use 4 MP60s. We use 3 MP40s, 2 on the bottom corners, and then 1 on the back to kind of break up the monotony from the big power heads on the end. So you'll notice the 2 MP60s on the top on either end, they run on a reef crest mode because they kind of batter the corals if they're on a really strong constant pace. Whereas the ones in the front do all the big stirring, so they run on a constant speed.
So in addition to flow, what are you using for return pumps to move the water through the filtration?
On this tank we have 2
This is like way above my pay
compact
grade, like these videos.
5000s for a little bit of redundancy there. If one does go down, we still have the second one running. It is an older model, but back to the same thing. If it's not broke,
Maybe I can
don't
put this
fix it. It works.
And one of the last pieces of the whole puzzle that we talked about is maintenance. Maintenance on this, what are we talking about for water changes?
We do the same 10 or 15% on this tank as we do for others.
Okay, and at the same time you're siphoning detritus off of the bare bottom?
Extremely important. That's the whole reason we have those power heads in the back corner to sweep it forward for us. You know, that way we're only dealing with 1 or 2 piles in the same spot each time.
So filter socks and skimmer cups like the 900, what's the schedule like for those?
Yeah, we use the same sheet for that. That way we make sure that every single week we're doing 2 times for the socks and then 2 times for the skimmer cups.
So I imagine power head maintenance is about the same on this tank like the 900?
This one's actually a little bit easier because they are Vortex pumps. So the wet side comes uncoupled from the glass, and it's really easy to just pull off and put back. And it gives us an opportunity to, again, take a look at the pump and make sure everything's in working order.
And how often are these done?
So those get done just the same. If there's algae, we clean them.
So Josh, is there anything on this tank that you would do differently?
We would probably add a power head or 2 on the back wall of this tank just to kind of give us a little bit of flow where we don't have it. That wouldn't be possible if there was sand in the tank, and being its bare bottom, it would make the world a difference.
So again, we want to thank Josh for walking us through this 500-gallon display. Thanks, Josh.
No problem, Randy.
Yeah. We're going to come back like we did with the 900 and show you mounting heights and program schedules, flow schedules for the pumps, and some par testing that we're going to do right here in the shop. So just like we did for the iconic WWC 900-gallon tank, we're going to dive into the specs and numbers we gathered on this amazing 500-gallon lobby tank, from the LED and T5 lighting schedules and spectrum settings, mounting heights and light spacing, to the full rundown of the 30-plus par measurements we took with both the MQ210 and 510 par meters from Apogee. Let's start with a refresher on the dimensions of the tank, which were 130 inches or a little over 10 feet wide by 30 inches front to back and 29 inches tall. This has 6 Radeon XR30s and 4 60-inch retrofitted ATI Blue Plus T5 bulbs and reflectors. Since the 500-gallon tank is only 30 inches wide, they opted to mount the Radeons perpendicular across the tank, which easily covers the tank evenly from front to back, and with each one spaced about 10 inches from inside edge to inside edge of each fixture, you end up with an even coverage across the entire 10-foot length. Again, like the 900-gallon, the T5 bulbs are spaced edge to edge lengthwise with a row of 2 in front and a row of 2 in back. And with 60-inch bulbs, the combination covers nearly the entire tank from edge to edge with 120 inches total. Looking at the T5 lights from the side, the rows are spaced at 24 inches from the center of one bulb to the other, giving the tank an even blanket of fill light to reduce those shadowing areas that can be created from using LEDs alone. One approach to helping with the reduction of these shadow areas and to increase the spread from the LEDs is to mount them higher than the average reefer would in their own home, which is a common theme over the WWC tanks, and Josh estimated that these lights over the 500 were mounted about 24 inches above the water. After measuring myself, I found that they were right at 16 inches off of the water surface, so not too far off, but still quite a bit higher than most would mount them at home. Moving on to the lighting schedule for the WWC 500-gallon lobby tank, which is nearly identical to that of the 900-gallon tank, with one subtle difference in overall intensity of the entire photo period being set to 70% instead of 75%. Keep in mind here that although the schedules and spectrums are nearly identical, because the 500 is using half of the radions that the 900 uses, the total par over the smaller footprint ends up working out to be pretty close to the same. To quickly recap the lighting schedule, much like the 900, the T5s come on and stay on from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m., and WWC is using a modified AB Plus template from EcoSmart Live for the Radeon XR30s that has the first 5 or so hours set to a more daylight-looking fuller spectrum, where all of the blue and violet channels are set to 100%, cool whites and greens at 50%, and the reds at 10%. The latter part of the day from noon until 7 p.m., all of the cool whites and greens and reds are turned off, while the blues and violets remain at 100%, giving the tank a full 12 and a half hours of total photo period. Following suit from the 900, we took 33 par measurements under each unique spectrum at various depths of the tank near our favorite corals, again with both the MQ210 and MQ510 par meters side by side, which you'll see denoted below. Right away, you'll see that there isn't much disparity between the two sensors, even though the MQ510 sensor is better at more accurately reporting the blue spectrum, and the MQ210 coming in at a lesser price point. That said, we have dove into a variety of reasons and factors as to why they may produce similar numbers in other BRS TV Investigates episodes that you may want to check out if you're interested in seeing our results. With that in mind, let's break down the par numbers we measured, and as you can see in the beginning 5 hours of the day, similarly to the 900-gallon tank, the center is expectedly higher overall due to the most intersecting light happening in the middle, leaving an average of about 305. I would say that likely due to a few inches less in tank height and the mounting height being 16 inches instead of the 20.5 for the 900, we do only see a couple of higher peaks in the uppermost portions of the tank where the par climbs above 400. But looking across the tank as a whole, the vast majority of corals are thriving within that optimal range of 200 to 350 par. Again, this speaks volumes to what can be achieved by focusing on an even distribution and diffusion of light, where almost anywhere in the tank I could place a coral and know it will thrive. The sides of the tank are also similar to the larger 900-gallon reef, with lower par overall than the center, where the left side averages out to be about 250 par, while the right's average is 261. Although slightly higher than the 900, likely due again to the smaller footprint and slightly lower mounting height, there is a fairly obvious pattern emerging where aiming for about 250 with a window of about 100 par in either direction throughout the tank is almost certainly going to produce awesome corals and an even more awesome tank, and is absolutely what I will aim for on my next SPS dominant system. Almost exactly like the larger 900 system, this 500-gallon only drops by 55 par to an overall average of 220 as the photo period moves into the last 7 hours, where the tank is a vibrant blue. Most of the center readings fall into the upper 200s to lower 200s, with some of the deeper areas being below 200, while the sides dip just a bit lower, ranging from the low to mid 100s upwards of mid 200s. So as we discussed in the last episode, we're getting a picture into a known recipe into creating a successful and stunning reef tank, and if followed exactly, should be able to be reproduced in our own homes.
So that was almost...
And for those of you with desires for tanks like these by using LEDs alone that are also jam-packed with wall-to-wall SPS, there are a few takeaways from what we've seen so far. The first being mount your lights high in order to get that even spread, diffusion, and distribution across the entire tank to help reduce hot spots and shadowing. Second, not everyone can or wants to mount their lights that high, in which case you can lower them, but to achieve the same results, you may need several more fixtures than you have already planned for to overcome shadows throughout the tank. And third, if your budget doesn't allow for a ton of individual fixtures, take a note from the pros like those here at WWC who choose to take the simple route and get the best of both worlds in LEDs and T5s to provide the desired light spread and diffusion.
All right, so
Don't forget to check out the final WWC walkthrough of their 293-gallon mixed reef, where we'll go over what goes into that recipe for a different tank type other than SPS dominant, which comes with a different view on some of the same concepts in order to provide for a more diverse group of coral species. This is one you definitely won't want to miss, as a large amount of reefers, ourselves included, aim for a tank filled with our favorite corals from SPS to LPS and softies in our own home. Don't forget that each week we give away some awesome prizes, and this week we want your opinion on your lighting style preference. For participating, we're giving you the chance to win one of 4 $250 gift cards to the site. So click on that link in the lower left or head over to the site and click on free prizes at the very top of the page to get signed up. Thanks for watching and subscribing, and hit that notification bell icon to be notified when we put out new videos each week. See you next time on BRS TV.
This is exactly halfway between half and 3/4 in this.
Find buzzer beaters and cliffhangers in one place. Get 100 plus channels of movies, TV, and live sports. YouTube TV. Try it free. Terms apply. Cancel anytime.
All right. And then we gotta get here. It's 130.
As an owner of Walton Goggins goggle glasses, I know how to make slick-looking goggle/glasses. But I have no idea how to make slick social media style stuff to sell it. But GoDaddy Aero uses AI not only to create social content out of thin air, it can build a whole social media calendar just for my business.
I'm pretty ADHD.
So all I had to do was upload a video of me and my pretty face, and voila.
Last one here.
Goggins goggle glasses are great gifts.
We're looking for 1 4.
Try saying that 10 times fast. Look like you know what you're doing at GoDaddy.com.
Damn. That was heavy-handed. All right.
Hi guys, I'm Randy with BRS TV, and we're on our third and final tank here at WWC. If you haven't seen the 900 and 500, go check those out, because this one will build on those two. Today we're talking about this 293-gallon mixed reef with sand, which might be the most important of the three, as it's very similar to the same tanks that you keep at home. So we're gonna jump right into this tank, and I've got Josh here with me again. Josh, how old is this tank?
This tank is about 6 years old now. It's approximately 39 inches from front to back and 60 inches long. And it's been Casper's home since he came with us.
So we're starting to notice a theme here that you guys like these 30-inch tall tanks and pretty deep from front to back.
That's correct. We try to keep the tanks about 30 inches tall because 24 is a little too shallow.
So this is what 2.5 cups is supposed to look like.
And the depth on the tank allows us for more of an artistic rock structure.
It's like 2
so you guys already have this 500-gallon in the storefront.
More or less, that's what I was saying,
Why the addition of the 293?
I'm sure some of the
Victor
stuff is
has
heavier
a thing
than
for
some of the other stuff, you know?
And we already have a tank with no sand, so we decided on this one to go with a little bit more of an LPS approach, where we can put lower flow, a little bit lower light, and appeal to some of those corals that wouldn't do so well in our higher
know how
tank.
much salt
so like the other two
there.
tanks, I'm guessing that the fish in here also serve a purpose.
They
I guess
do.
I don't know how much
Again,
this weighs.
Utilitarian, as we said before, the tank.
So I'm gonna close this up.
So they're
just
there
for
to eat
now.
algae, and primarily to get along with
Use a handy
Casper.
zip
so
tie
we chose
it
our
came with.
fish around him, basically. So we've had Casper for about 6 years now. He's leucistic, so there has been times where he's gone a little bit yellow, kind of looked like a pyramid butterfly, and back to white like you see him now. And he's kind of our pride and joy around here. So the fish that we put in here, we were sure they would get along well. And we haven't had any new additions since. His health is a priority of ours, being he's the only one in captivity that we're aware of.
So for cleanup crew on this tank, it seems that there's little to none.
Yeah, there's really not a lot of rock space in the tank, so the snails have a hard time holding on to something and not ending up upside down in the sand bed.
So let's talk again about the first element of reef tank biology, starting with chemistry. This tank is probably like the other ones where we're at 480 calcium, 1440 magnesium, and 8.6 alkalinity.
Yeah, that covers pretty much everything here at the shop.
So we've got temperature at 78 degrees, and trace elements is handled by the water changes with the Brightwell Neomarine.
Yeah, that's correct. So we're going to do the same 10 to 15% water change as we would on the rest of our systems.
So as far as pH, is this like the other tanks?
It is. It runs at about 7, 9. If we're lucky, we get to maybe 8. The room tends to have a good amount of people in it, so there is a fair share of carbon dioxide. Not to mention, we do run a calcium reactor,
started to stream, I was like, I for sure have everything.
A slight effect on the pH.
So on the 500 gallon, you guys have an auto top off. What are you guys using on this tank?
Right, we actually use the same feed barrel. We use saturated kalkwasser to deliver that high pH that we look for in the 500 gallon tank.
And what do you find the benefits from that higher pH?
A more robust coral that will lay down a skeletal base faster than
throw a little bit of this in there.
A high pH environment.
So cycling this tank was another 4-month process?
Actually, no. The cycle is more around 2 months, like the 500, because of the fact that it is in our front
throw
retail
some water
space.
into it.
We kind of pushed a little bit shorter than we should have.
5 gallons here is like pretty much almost to the top.
Longer.
So let's move on to that second component of reef tank biology with filtration. Do you guys have a skimmer on this tank?
We do not.
Is there a reason why you decided not to go with a skimmer?
Yeah, we had a skimmer at one point in time, but it seemed a little bit too much. The tank was over-skimmed, and some of the larger
adding a bunch of water.
Didn't appreciate that. They got kind of skinny and lost a little bit of color, so we took it offline. At some point in time, if we ever feel the need to put a skimmer
pretty
back,
good right
we
now.
may, but it's doing well just the way that it is.
So on this one, is it filter socks or filter pads?
Add some more.
This is a filter sock. The sump has an integrated hole for a sock. It would probably be better to have the entire shop converted over to filter pad at some point, but for now we use socks.
So that's 3 systems with filter pads or filter socks. What's the primary use for you guys with these?
We feel it takes out a lot of particulate. Being we do feed a lot, that's pretty important. It helps us export some of that excess nutrient. It also benefits the tank's clarity, because then you don't have all that stuff floating around in the water column that you can see when the bright lights are on.
So the biological filtration for the other 2 tanks was rock only. The biological filtration on this tank includes rock and the sand?
Yeah, it's not dissimilar. The rock is really mature rock that we've had for years, which is always going to be a plus for us. On top of the fact that we do have the sand bed for that added nutrient that we're looking for.
Pour a little smoother,
Is there anything you don't like about the sand?
It's a lot more labor intensive. This tank is probably the most difficult to keep in show condition on a regular basis. In addition to the amount of work that it takes to keep the sand bed clean, we can only deliver less than half of the flow we would in our other tanks as well, being the fact that they are bare bottom and this one has sand.
So Josh, that brings us to another component of filtration with flow. What are you guys using for flow on this tank?
On this tank, we have 4 Ecotech MP40s. On the back side of the tank, because the rock structure is a little bit higher, they're turned down more. And in the front, where it's more open, they do have a little bit more intensity, but we still have to keep it low to keep that sand in place. So this is a good time to point out that because we do have a higher nutrient system with lower flow, some of the acropora specifically don't color up as well as they would in some of our other systems. However, we are trying to cater to every coral in this tank, from either upper reef slopes or lower spots. Some of these corals come from 80 feet, you know, and we're trying to keep it in a box that's only 30 inches tall.
You make a good point that these mixed reef tanks could probably be some of the hardest to keep, unlike species-specific SPS tanks, because we're trying to keep such a diverse group of corals that wouldn't naturally occur that way in the wild.
I would definitely agree with that. Mixed reef tanks are probably the most common within the hobbyist home, but they are definitely the hardest to take care of due to the wide variety of corals we keep. Because of the middle ground parameters that we keep on this tank and the wide variety of corals that we keep here, I would expect that any of the new corals that we truly cherish could go into this tank and guarantee its survival.
Getting to that last component of flow with the return pump, what are you guys using on this tank?
On this tank, it's a Mag 9.5.
So I noticed that there's no DC-powered pumps on any of your guys' system. Is there a reason behind that?
We have a lot of AC pumps around the shop because they are plug and play and they do last a long time. DC pumps offer that really quiet controllability factor. Here, that's really not an obstacle. We don't need it to be quieter in here.
On the other 2 tanks, you guys run carbon. Same on this one?
Yeah, very similar to the 500 because it's in the display room. There's actually 3 panes of viewing, so when you look straight through it, if there is a tinge of green, we kind of want that to go.
Yeah. How do you guys run that carbon?
In a carbon reactor.
All right, Josh, we're on that third element of reef tank biology with lighting. What do you guys run on this tank?
On this tank, we have 6 XR15 Gen 4 Pros. Previously, around 6 months ago, we switched from XR30s to deliver a better spread from front to back because we did have a little bit of dark in the front and on the back side of the tank. We also added the diffuser to help blend some of that light. You know, with the sand bed, you do pick up on a lot of those bands of red and green, and with the diffuser, you don't see that anymore. With the diffuser, we get more of a smooth shimmer rather than the flicker that you would get without the diffuser. And it gives more of that T5 appeal, if you know what I'm saying.
And unlike the other tank,
get a
this
pump.
one has no
You get a pump.
T5s.
We opted to stay away from T5 for the simple fact that it doesn't look good with an open top tank.
Have you guys ever considered something like the Aquatic Life hybrid fixture?
We've kicked around the idea of adding T5s to it, but it just never really came to because it's doing well the way that it is, and we felt it was necessary to just leave it. You know, if somebody dropped off an extra row of XR15s for free, I would probably say I would go up onto the tank to solve that light distribution problem.
So elaborate a little bit more about the spacing and the mounting height. On
If they
these
gave me
XR15s.
one, I'd take it
So
too.
very similar to the other tanks. They're mounted quite high off the water. I think these ones might be a little bit closer at like 20 inches. And we do space them a little bit more than a foot apart. But it was a vast improvement over the 3 XR30s that we had on there before this.
So you're saying that extra mounting height solves some of that distribution problem?
Yeah, I think honestly the biggest key there is that we're given an even or a more even distribution of intensity.
Speaking of intensity, on those other tanks, we were ranging from around 80 par to 350 or above par. On this one, what is your guys' intensity and spectrum?
So the spectrum is the same. We use the same schedule on all of our display tanks, and we do modify the intensity accordingly. The intensity on this tank is lower because, like we said before, we're trying to cater to a
almost
more
see
wide variety of
the
coral
bottom of
rather
the
than
stir
just
stick,
making
so
sure our aquapore is
it's
growing
gonna take a little
water
while.
properly.
So we're on that last element of reef tank
guess they'll
biology
have to
with
be, like,
nutrients.
completely,
Nitrates and
completely,
phosphate in this
completely
tank, is it similar to the other ones?
Because we're just
It's
putting it in a
close.
tank that's got nothing
We
in it.
actually keep the nitrate a little bit lower in this tank, more
Yeah, I see.
intentionally
Have it
to
a
keep
little
the
clear.
sand bed cleaner.
So you're saying because of the
Then
sand,
go
you
to
have to
add
intentionally
the
keep
water
nitrates
into the
down?
tank instead
Yeah,
of
we
it being just a
find
straight
that
cloud mess.
with a little bit of a lower level nitrate, we prevent the same algae from growing on the sand that you get on your glass. To add to that, the sand bed, when it's clean, really sets this tank off. So we do our best to try to make sure it stays pearly white.
So all the nutrients in this tank come from your WWC food?
Yeah, we feed this tank every hour on the hour, just like all of our other tanks do. The more we do things similar from one tank to the next, the fewer variables we have, and we try to keep it really simple, and that's part of the process.
So Josh, maintenance is one of the last components, and you already mentioned the 10 to 15% water changes on this tank, as well as cleaning the glass. What do you do to maintain the sand?
So the sand, because of the fact that we don't have bare bottom here, collects the same amount of detritus. It just presents itself differently. So we do gravel vac it, and we try to do that weekly. And then maybe once a month we'll go in with a net and we'll actually sift the bigger particles out of the sand that accumulate.
So the reoccurring theme here is everything's the same, everything's simple. As far as like pump maintenance, are we talking about the same as on the 500?
Watch.
Yeah, so anytime we're gonna get algae on these pumps, we do pull them off and clean them because it is easy. You know, with the Vortex pump, you just pull it off, throw it in vinegar, scrub it down, and put it back in the tank. As far as filter socks, just like the other systems on our workflow chart, we do that twice a week.
So one thing we didn't touch on in the other tanks is your guys' testing schedule. What does that look like?
All of our systems get tested weekly for calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, salinity. Salinity is more like daily. Like I said, we have to top off a lot of our systems manually, but alkalinity gets done twice a week, and Joe does a great job of that. He logs all of our water parameters for the week for us.
With the 293, is there anything different you would do?
Yeah, first we would probably add a Vortex in the back right-hand corner because it is a little bit lacking back there, being the fact that it is 39 inches from front to back. Because of the fact that the tank is 39 inches from front to back, it's really difficult to work underneath it. So we would probably raise the stand and maybe put end panels that remove or a door or something for easier access.
All right, Josh, the last question I have for you. Is there
Oh,
any
that
big
mess,
wins
that
on
thing's
this
crazy.
tank?
Specific to this tank, definitely, would be having Casper around. He's kind of our mascot. Many, many times people walk in the door and say, "Where's Casper?" And it is a good conversation piece.
So one last time, I want to thank Josh for showing us around and giving us the details of this 293 tank. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Randy.
There's Casper
And
right
just
there.
before we close this one out, we're going to go back through and show you the spectrum and intensities of the lights, and as well as take some par readings and other things to show you what's under the hood of this tank. All right, guys, we're wrapping up this final episode of the WWC tank interviews, and just like we did with the 900 and 500 gallon systems, I'm circling back to give you the in-depth specs for the light mounting and spacing, as well as par measurements that we took on this 293 gallon mixed reef tank. Looking first at the dimensions of this mixed tank,
bottom.
it's quite a bit shorter than the 9 and 500 gallon at 60 inches, 39 inches front to back, and 28 inches tall, and is lit with 2 rows of 3 for a total of 6 Radeon XR15s with diffusers. Right away, there are 2 takeaways that I see. First, with all 3 tanks, is their depth from front to back, which was 4 feet on the 900, 30 inches on the 500, and now 39 inches on the 293. Aesthetically, I'd have to say that I'm a big fan of these deep tanks and how they provide an eye-pleasing coral placement and aquascape, but also about the functionality that comes from having a lot of space from front to back to get water moving through all parts of the tank. The second thing that jumps out to me is that WWC didn't put a hood or canopy over this tank, which can make it more difficult to add T5s for that same even fill light as they did with the larger tanks, while still maintaining that clean look. But to compensate and still provide that spectrum blending and diffusion, they went with a diffuser on each Radeon XR15 and mounted them pretty high in a grid of 6 fixtures to essentially create the same effect, because a mixed reef tank doesn't need as much attention to that perfect blanket coverage as with an SPS dominant system. Let's take a look at these lights a little further, which, as I mentioned, are spaced in rows of 2, with each fixture being spaced right at 12 inches from inside edge to inside edge across the length of the tank, and the rows being spaced at 4 inches from the inside edge of one row to the other row. Again, much like Josh estimated for the other 2 tanks, where he figured these lights were mounted a bit higher from the water surface, when I measured the lights, they ended up being right at 13.5 inches from the surface, which is still higher than most reefers would at home, but a bit closer than the 500 and 900 gallon tanks. Yet on this mixed reef tank, the super even distribution of light is less critical. WWC has tripled down on the same lighting schedule for this tank, nearly exactly like the 500 and 900. However, here we see an overall intensity set at 67% for both the morning and afternoon spectrum settings, keeping in mind that these are Radeon XR15s and not the larger XR30s. So as we'll see in just a minute, it ends up producing slightly lower PAR overall, as could be expected and desired for a mixed reef tank. Just like the tanks we previously shared, there's a ramp-up time of about an hour, followed by 5 hours of a fuller daylight spectrum from around 7 a.m. to noon, where the UV, blue, and violet channels are all set to 100, cool whites and greens at 50, and reds at 10%. After that, the spectrum shifts to remove the cool white, green, and reds, but all other channels stay the same from about noon to 7 p.m. for a full photo period of 12.5 hours. Now let's dive into the PAR numbers on this mixed reef tank.
12 hours
full of
is
a diverse
crazy.
variety of corals, each with differing light requirements. The first thing I noticed when looking at the tank overall is that the majority of the higher PAR demand SPS are mounted in the upper to mid portions of the tank, where the PAR ranges from about 150 to the lower 200s on average. There are some places where the SPS are thriving in PAR down around the lower 100s, but I'd say the range is pretty similar to a lot of the same levels in the 9 and 500 gallon systems for these types of corals. Outside of that, for both the left and right sides of the tank, the overall PAR average throughout the tank during the first 5 hours of the more full daylight looking spectrum is only 128, which seems to hit a sweet spot for nearly all of the corals, including the LPS and softies. However, in some of those areas that dip below 100, you can see some strategically placed lower light corals thriving as well, which is a common method of coral placement in a mixed reef tank that WWC seems to have perfected pretty well. Moving on to the blue spectrum that runs for the last 7 hours of the day,
I think this is good enough.
We see a loss of only 31 PAR throughout the entire tank, which is right in line with the differences seen in the 500 and 900 gallon SPS dominant system. Here we can see that only a couple of points climb above the 150 PAR range, but the overall PAR stays under 100, coming in at an average of 97. This is likely a lower average PAR than many reefers maintain for their mixed reef tanks, but there's definitely no denying WWC's results. So what can we learn from the lighting recipe on this stunning mixed reef tank as opposed to the other 2 SPS dominant tanks at WWC? I'd say that catering to the lighting needs of a single or similar types of corals like the stick-heavy 900 and 500 gallon tanks may come with a few more challenges as far as providing an even amount of PAR from top to bottom and edge to the edge of the entire tank. Things like raising the lights up higher than normal to reduce shadowing and increase distribution, adding more lights than you may have thought you needed to overcome the same hurdles in even light spread and diffusion, or adding T5 bulbs to mitigate both challenges while maintaining that even fill light throughout the tank, which is critical for those SPS only or dominant tanks. However, here on the 293 mixed reef tank, I'd say that some of the same challenges exist, but seem to be a bit easier to overcome while maintaining an aesthetically appealing look and saving you a bit of cash in your pocket by using multiple single points of light mounted on a grid to more strategically provide that even distribution, then coupling that with the diffusers to replicate the fill light effect that the T5s bring, which can ultimately help to reduce shadows and blend the spectrum more evenly. I'm personally an advocate for this approach to lighting, as I'm not very keen on a canopy or hood myself, and these XR15s just look awesome over this tank. One last note to mention here, which I think Ryan will share his insight about in an upcoming episode, is the relationship we see between par and flow in the mixed reef tank, with both being intentionally lower, while the two larger SPS tanks have a par and flow relationship in the higher ranges. So that's it for the WWC tanks, and we can't thank them enough for letting us dive into these tanks, and for Josh giving up a couple of days to walk us through how he and his team create such amazing tanks that, honestly, a large amount of reefers dream about having in their own homes. Be sure to tune in next week when Ryan is back with his take on what he saw here and his introduction into how we plan to recreate the same gorgeous tanks that WWC has done here in our own lobby of the BRS office, using a hybrid system approach that pulls from WWC's recipe for creating an awesome tank, coupled with our own collective BRS knowledge and practices. We're doing this in hopes to provide you, the community, with an easy-to-understand path to ultimately do the same in your own home, regardless of what tank and equipment you choose to use. Don't forget that this entire month is the largest bulk reef supply giveaway we've ever done, with a dream tank outfitted with over $20,000 in gear. And next week, we'll be showing you what it comes with. So be sure to hit that link in the lower left or head over to the site, click on free stuff at the top of the page, and get signed up. This is one giveaway you won't want to miss. See you next time on BRS TV.
But it's right there. Maybe it's 1.26.
To our Wi-Fi.
Is that what I'm looking for?
To online monsters.
30.
Get
No, 35
devices and treat yourself to
degrees.
peace of mind. Online security starts with a VPN.
It's like 35 degrees. Seems pretty close to me. And now that there's no top, got my towel. I could just throw
Today
it
on
the
BRS
rocks.
TV, we have a quick review of everything that we learned from our WWC tank tours, combined with a bit of vision into what the rest of the series will look like, as well as continuing to give away that $20,000 dream tank at the end. Want a tank like this one that we're building? Here it is. Hey, I'm Ryan, your host of BRS TV. This week we have episode 5 of the BRS WWC hybrid system. In this series, we're developing a method of dealing with almost every major reefing topic and assembling them into one cohesive system.
This is going to take a little
that,
while.
above all else, is simple and stable. This hybrid system will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels that most reefers will be able to follow and expect to achieve very similar results. Hopefully exploring these methods in a manner where, regardless of your experience level in the hobby, learn something new and use WWC and BRS team's experiences to refine our knowledge. Today is going to be two things: an overview of the WWC tank recipes that we learned from their team. This is the result of 2 16-hour days learning everything that we can, countless emails, texts, and phone calls, combined with their team flying up here to really nail all this down.
That they really
Throughout
went
the
through all that
series,
effort.
we'll dive deeper into not just the how, but the why of each major topic. And for today, we're going to keep it somewhat brief, followed with exactly what you can expect to see in this series and how it applies to a home environment. So to start this off, what you saw in the last few weeks is two things: 2 SPS dominant tanks. There may be some other corals in the 500 and 900, but these tanks are currently set up for one purpose: growing wall-to-wall SPS colonies with awesome coloration and health. Really many people's dream tank. The 293, however, is set up for a mixed tank of LPS and SPS, which is much more common. I just want to share right off the bat that while mixed tanks are much more popular than SPS dominant tanks, both of our teams universally agree that a mixed tank is much harder to achieve the best results with than an SPS-only tank. That's because you're mixing corals found at 40 feet with those found at 10 feet, which in nature have very different flow, lighting, and nutrient needs. So a mixed tank is less about finding the ideal solutions for each and much more about finding the middle ground between the two, as well as attempting to create the zones in the tank that fit the different coral type needs. I share this just because I think many newer reefers think of SPS as the most difficult, when in fact the mixed tank they're about to embark on is much more difficult. On a scale of 1 to 10, from easiest tanks to hardest, I'd say polyp tanks like zoanthids and mushrooms are like a 2 to 3. Softy tanks maybe only slightly harder. LPS tanks have a few additional needs and maybe a 4 to 5. SPS tanks require more attention to a variety of factors than like a 6 or 7. But a mixed reef with all of these corals really requires all 4 skills, knowing just not what they need, but how to provide it, and ultimately why a mixed tank can be an 8 to 10 difficulty to set up properly. Probably also somewhat related to the strong learning curve for newer reefers. So if I had one piece of advice for newer reefers, it would be attempt to stick to one of these types of coral, learn from the success and challenges, and then follow that type of progression path towards the more difficult tank types. So with that in mind, this is what I saw as the WWC recipe for filtration, lighting, flow, the cycle, chemistry, coral nutrition, and the maintenance rhythm. This is the essence of a successful reef tank. If you get this right, a vast majority of reefers will be successful. Starting with filtration and flow, because they're fairly closely intertwined. One of the things that you're going to hear from the WWC team over and over is a strong preference for established live rock and high flow. Established rock being the #1 focus for filtration, the older the better. Just a strong belief that old established rock is the core of a successful reef tank. Any negatives associated with old live rock greatly outweighed by the stability aspects. You'll also see that they will never set up an SPS tank with sand. Sand can be a huge component of filtration in many tanks. We both believe that there is a strong argument to be made that the sand bed may actually be a bigger component of biological filtration than the rock due to the surface area of the small grains, as well as a type of filtration that happens below the surface of the sand. That said, you will never find sand in a WWC SPS tank for 2 major reasons. First, well, sand can be a component of an easier to set up tank and much more stable in the beginning. Over time, it can collect or produce all kinds of undesirable pollutants in the tank. This is something that you can see by going to the corner of an established reef tank sand bed, stirring it up, and you will likely see a cloud that most reefers would likely prefer was not in the tank. Without the sand bed, you can use flow, filtration, and maintenance to keep all of that crud out of the tank rather than let it settle out and accumulate in the sand bed. The way the WWC team put it to me was the first 8 months to a year of the bare bottom tank will be much more difficult because it's just less biologically stable without the sand. However, after that, the bare bottom tank will be much more stable because it doesn't have the accumulation issues that sand has. Meaning after the first 8 to 12 months and every year after that, the bare bottom is likely to avoid all kinds of issues and be a lot easier. A little effort and patience on the front end pays off in the long term. However, much more than that, it's literally impossible to provide the kind of flow that they want to put in a tank that has sand. It's their team's assertion that flow is more important than a vast majority of system design elements, including lighting. Flow is the #1 most critical component for an SPS coral's biological process. Varied flow just not only serving as a pumping mechanism for biological processes within the coral's tissue, but also ridding itself of excess CO2, harmful byproducts of photosynthesis like oxidants, and gas exchange or element transfer through the coral's boundary layer. In the end, there's a close relationship between lighting, flow, and nutrient availability. If you scale one up, there'll be even more benefit if you scale the others up with it. And sometimes one can be a limiting factor or even harmful if it's not scaled up with the others. In this case, I would say increasing lighting intensity or length of the photo period will almost always be even more successful if flow is properly scaled up with it. So how much flow is enough? Reefers often say things like 30 to 50x turnover.
How much flow?
Capable of 70 to 100 these days. Keep in mind that today's implementations rarely have all pumps turned on to max all at once. So pumps on a wave maker or DC pumps are capable of 70 to 100x turnover, are much more likely producing 35 to 50 at any given point, as half the pumps are either off or in the low flow position. So I think it's important to note here that there are obviously tons of successful SPS dominant tanks out there with sand, many of which I'd also call dream tank quality, including WWC's 293, which has sand and much less flow. No one would call this the wrong way to do this, and almost anyone would be ecstatic with the results. However, while the 293 mixed tank is an amazing tank, if you look at the SPS coloration and growth on this tank versus the higher flow NPAR bare bottom 500 SPS tank right next to it, there's no question there's a large incremental increase in coloration in both the 500 and 900. I would also say almost every commercial facility that I run into where caring for these animals goes beyond just a hobby, and the growth and coloration results are also financially motivated. Almost all of them are going bare bottom with near ridiculous amounts of flow. Very few of them are focused on perfecting lighting, but most are always perfecting flow. Outside of that, there are a few other simple elements related to filtration, the use of carbon to remove color pigments, organics and other contaminants from the tank, filter pads or socks to remove undesirable waste, and floating particulates from the water. These pads are changed out 2 times a week, which matches some data from BRS TV Investigates on how frequently the filter socks and pads do need to be changed to be effective. They also run easy-to-access recirculating external skimmers to remove excess waste, as well as promote increased gas exchange, preference being AC pump skimmers because they are more reliable. WWC has expressed a particular fondness of the Super Reef and SRO line of skimmers from Reef Octopus, which use that AC bubble blaster pumps. They just work and last a long time without consistent need of maintenance, something that the BRS team and I agree with entirely. Somewhat related to filtration is a cycle. Most reefers are in search for an Insta-tank. Get water and corals into it as soon as possible, which can certainly be done. But WWC is a firm believer in long cycles for SPS tanks, at least a 4-month cycle, 3 months of which is done without light. Cycle here meaning more than just a fish cycle, but meaning something more inclusive to the entire biological process happening in the tank, which is going to make it more stable for sensitive animals like SPS corals. You can argue that it can be done faster, but I think almost everyone will agree that initial success rates increase linearly with the length of the cycle. Throughout this series, we have seen some mentions in the comments that no one would have that kind of patience, and a 4-month cycle is just too long. I would like to just point out that we're not talking about an average first tank here. SPS corals are amongst the most sensitive and receive the most benefit from tank stability. So I think the 4 months, 3 months without light is a good recommendation for most reefers looking to start a new SPS tank and ensure the highest success rates. Frankly, some might even recommend longer, particularly if you're going bare bottom. Next, looking at lighting, this is an interesting topic because it's probably one of the most debated topics and one of the elements of reefing that the most reefers are having the most mortalities and catastrophic failures with. Yet at the same time, this was and should be one of the easiest things on the entire tank. That's because all that's required to be successful here is a highly diffused light source that covers a wide area of light with the right spectrum. That's as simple as plugging a bank of proven T5s or halide bulbs with proper reflectors into the wall and walking away. This is what the WWC team relied on for a very long time. There's no question that the T5s and the halides met their simple and stable approach goals. However, the lighting conversation has largely changed from how do I provide proper light to the reef tank, which was pretty easy, to how do I use LEDs to light a reef tank. Note the not so subtle difference there. One is how do I support the biological need for my corals, and the other is how do I use one very specific technology to do this. Unless you own stock in LED companies, that might not be the wisest approach, especially because the nature of LEDs is they're small, compact light sources, which is pretty far from the highly diffused, very difficult to shadow, even light source of a vast majority of reef tanks we're using prior to using LEDs. That said, LEDs come with all kinds of advantages: dimming, limited heat, energy efficiency.
No, LEDs are here,
changes.
LEDs are
They're
here
low
and here to stay,
profile,
for sure.
compact and attractive. The phone apps, slider bars, and all kinds of cool features, which mean LEDs are here to stay in certainly the future.
Yep. See, I said
It's
it.
pretty easy to implement them for most types of tanks. It's how do we use them for high density SPS tanks? That's an important note. It's a lot easier to use LEDs in a mixed tank or other tank types because even coverage and shadowing just isn't as big of an issue as it is with an SPS dominant tank like these, particularly if your goal is to grow larger density packed SPS colonies, which at the 2 to 3 year mark don't shadow their neighbors and also don't shadow themselves. So the WWC team feels exactly the same. They want the advantages of the LEDs, but the goal isn't use LEDs at all costs. It's light the tank properly and use technology to do it in a manner which meets their simple and stable goals. Their solution is to use the T5 Radion LED hybrid on both the 500 and 900 SPS tanks,
So
using LEDs as the primary light, then using the T5s as the fill light in between them to eliminate shadows, hot spots, and support proper growth. They also raise the lights up to 1.5 feet to nearly 2 feet above the tank, which is double to triple the 8-inch height that most reefers are mounting them on at home. Mounting the LEDs that high not only evens the intensity out over a larger area, but allows the spectrum from the individual LEDs to blend together into something more cohesive. They then use a par meter to tune all of this, so the par is largely in that 150 to 350 par range for the morning, and then slightly lower for the rest of the day. There was no universe where they were going to turn on all of this light, slide the sliders until it looks good to the eye, and then call it a day. There's just too much invested in these tanks to rely on guesses and luck. On the Mixed Reef 293, where we're balancing the SPS corals with the LPS corals, the story is a bit different. On this tank, they went LED only with diffused Radion XR15s, still mounted higher than most, but still closer to the water's surface than the SPS tanks, spaced properly over the tank, and then tuned to a lower par range. This mixed tank style with less densely packed SPS tanks just has a more limited lighting demand, and in some ways, easier to light properly, but the par range is still controlled and done via a par meter, not just flipping switches and guessing. This is a pretty critical point to understand here because there are 20 times as many mixed tanks out there than there are high-density SPS tanks. This grid of 6 XR15s on nearly a 300-gallon tank is producing awesome results for a wide range of corals. I would note that by using 6 XR15s rather than 3 XR30s, they're able to spread the light out over a larger area, but at the same cost. The WWC team did share with me that if this tank was going to be transitioned to a high-density SPS only tank, they would add a third row of XR15s and raise the lights up a bit, or attempt to add some T5s for fill light. So all that said, since most of today's lighting solutions are really not just plug and play anymore, most of the reefers are reliant on instinct, research, and trial and error, often with a few expensive mortalities, or buying a par meter, and at $400 to $500 a par meter is really out of the question for most reefers. Double so because you might only use it for a couple weeks. As long as you have the ability to plug it into a Windows laptop or PC, the Senai and USB Apogee is much more affordable option at about $200, or Neptune's PMK at $300. But even at that price, it's pretty high. And because of that, I'm trying to get the team here to find a way to rent handheld apogee meters, which are the easiest to use and make proper lighting setup more available to the average reefer. Maybe all of you could share in the comments or a reef-to-reef thread if you would value the ability to rent a meter like this. Really, most people are only going to need the meter for a few weeks to tweak some settings, watch how the tank responds, and get it right. Hopefully a low-cost rental service like this could make it more accessible to more reefers. I don't want to present a par meter as 100% critical, but with LEDs and newer to intermediate reefers, the success rates will skyrocket if we're lighting the tanks intelligently with a defined goal rather than just guessing. Moving on to how the WWC teams to approach chemistry. They don't get too fancy, they keep it simple and stable above all else. A DKH at 8.6, calcium at 480, and magnesium at 1440. There's no rocket science to these levels. They're just designed to be a bit elevated, which allows for the inevitable mistakes over time. For instance, it is pretty easy for an SPS system to drop a full DKH in a single day if something goes wrong, and it will eventually, so that 8.6 DKH keeps you away from that danger level of dropping below 7. In the end, I don't think there's any sound science that these levels are going to answer the unicorn hunt to best or perfect levels, but there's no denying the results. If you maintain these levels stably, I think most reefers will universally agree that major element chemistry will not prevent success with your tank. These levels are maintained with a calcium reactor and partially with Brightwell's Magnesium P in all 3 tanks, partially because a calcium reactor is the most cost-effective solution for tanks this size, but also because the calcium reactors presumably replenish various minor and trace elements. In that spirit, the approach to maintaining all of the minor and trace elements is just the calcium reactor and 10 to 15% water changes weekly.
Messy here.
Presumably, some elements are partially depleted this way, and the team does acknowledge that there may be some benefit to maintaining minor and trace elements more precisely, but they also don't want to play mad scientist with dozens of trace element bottles, and that process would deviate drastically from their keep it simple and stable approach.
Thermometer.
In the end, I tend to agree that that is simple and stable, and the approach is more likely to produce 10-year successful tank just because it is simple and harder to mess up catastrophically. Moving on to coral nutrition, often referred to as nutrients in reefing, I have to say it's pretty refreshing to discuss this with some like-minded individuals. Both of our teams dislike how the industry uses the word nutrients because in a vast majority of instances, that only means nitrate and phosphate to reefers. Well, nitrate and phosphate are nutrients. It's just
halfway, that's 5 gallons.
Of the overall coral nutrition. The corals are capable of providing a vast majority of the energy
13
they
would
need
be
from
like
light
all the way
and
to the
water
top,
alone.
so it's probably gonna
However,
have
they
only
do
like 11
benefit
gallons.
from sources of protein, building blocks of protein with amino acids, as well as nitrogen and phosphorus.
There's something fucking
This is
floating
going to
around.
be a much longer conversation in a future episode, but the WWC team doesn't spend a lot of time concerning themselves with nitrate and phosphate. Other than they do like to keep it under around 20 parts per million nitrate and 0.1 parts per million phosphate.
Two little fishes are going to be at Skellyfest.
Just significantly
So I'm
over
excited
that
to
is
go
probably a
check
bad
them out
idea in
and
terms of
go see
coral
what they're like.
calcification and pest organisms.
Some of their
The
peoples.
20 parts per million nitrate is more just where the tank ended up and stabilized around more than an actual goal. If it had stabilized around 10 parts per million, they shared that there's no chance that they would dose nitrate to get it up.
So that's
as long as it's not above 20, they're not
was
going to do
one.
much to get it down either. The only real thing the WWC team focus on
Oh,
in
you know
terms
what
of
though?
nutrients
I
is
still have like
protein
this
input
much
into a
water. Maybe
lesser
that's why
degree
it's like
amino
just a little
acids,
bit of
all provided with their
1.26.
store-made food, which is largely food processed fish, amino acids, and
Should I just
particular
add this?
foods like reefroids mixed
Or should I
together.
keep this?
This food is fed by the
I kinda
staff
need
on
this.
the hour, every hour. Literally, there's an alarm in the back that goes off every hour, and they walk around and feed every tank on the hour during the day when the lights are on. Again, talking to them, there's zero talk about nitrate and phosphate, only protein input. This was something that we tried pretty
That was like
hard to get
RODI
across
water.
in the BRS 160 series as well. The 2 cubes of mysis, 2 cubes of clannets, 2 cubes of cyclopods, algae extreme pellets, reef chili, KZ amino acids fed every day. There's a ton of protein and healthy fat-based nutrition being added to the tank every day, but in our case, very low nitrate and phosphate. It's more about complete nutritive input than it is about resulting nitrate and phosphate levels in the tank. In fact, when their team was up here in Minnesota going over all of this, I made a commitment to them that I'm going to do my best to never use the word nutrients again, just because it's not clear what that means to many reefers. From here on out, I'm going to do my best to use the word nutrition rather than nutrients, because that includes things like protein and amino acids, which is more encompassing and helpful. When talking about nitrate and phosphate, directly use those words specifically. When talking about protein and healthy fats, use those words specifically instead. Just to bring this home, the WWC team also strongly believes that there's a direct correlation between lighting and the coral nutrition and even
That was
flow.
like half a gallon.
If you increase the amount of light, either
like a
intensity of the
quarter
lights
gallon.
or length that they're on, it
So
will
that could be
increase
that
the amount of
1.2 that
energy
could be the
coral
0.1,
produces.
0.01
In turn,
or
if the
whatever it
coral
could
has
be.
additional energy, it will likely
next
benefit
bottle.
from additional protein availability at the same time. So light increases are not always, but often done in conjunction with protein increases, if possible even flow increases as well to help the coral with the additional gas exchange. Notice there's no mention of nitrate or phosphate in any of that. It's not that a tank can't be nitrate or phosphate deficient or achieve benefits associated with higher or lower levels, just that if we focus on various forms of protein input, it's unlikely that nitrate or phosphate will be low enough to be an issue. Keep in mind that as long as nitrate and phosphate levels are consistently above zero, it will always be much higher and more available than in a vast majority of natural coral reefs. So some of you are asking, what's going on here? Did he just say 0.1 or 0.01 phosphate? And rather than 20 parts per million nitrate, did he mean 0.2? I think that's because the hobby has been after as low of nitrate and phosphate levels as possible, because historically it's been so hard to maintain low levels, and there are so many issues with pest organisms that often go away with lower levels. However, now with properly designed refugiums, algae scrubbers, and various carbon dosing options, it's become very easy to maintain lower levels. Some would even say too low. So please remember, this is never about one extreme or another. For most reefers, it's about balance, finding the right nutritive input that promotes healthy corals but doesn't cause other issues in the tank. In that spirit, I want to state that feeding tons of protein hourly or allowing high nitrate and phosphate levels like this is not something the BRS or WWC team would recommend to most reefers, particularly newer tanks. The reason why this is working here in the WWC 500, 900, and 293 is because these are robust tanks that have huge nutritional uptake and can handle even benefit from that additional
You're trying to call my tank not robust, man? Is that what you're trying to say?
Stable tanks with an incredible amount of herbivorous fish called the tang gang, as well as a well-developed microfauna population grazing on the algae all the time.
Called the tang gang.
This level of nutritive input is not the kind of thing that either team would recommend someone go out and immediately implement. And if you do ignore this warning, don't be surprised if you see an almost immediate algae, cyano, dino, or other pest outbreak. It's about balance and understanding the nutritive input for the stage of your tank. The last piece here is the maintenance rhythm. The one thing the WWC team does without fail is maintenance. On time, every time. Water changes are never missed. Pumps are cleaned when they look dirty, not when they stop working. Glass is cleaned daily. Filter pads are changed twice a week. Carbon change on time, hourly feeding. This is probably just going to be one of the harder elements for the average reefer to follow as well as at home. But the goal here is stable. And part of stable is doing things on time to prevent issues rather than treat them after the fact. Okay, so that leads into why we're sharing that BRS WWC hybrid method rather than just sharing straight up do what WWC does. Well, for those who can, I'd say follow WWC recipe exactly and find success almost certainly. Fact is, a home environment and a business environment
we did
are just
145
different. One has
grams.
employees tending to things 12 hours a day, often very large volumes of water, and doesn't have common concerns like noise or vacations. So the hybrid method is going to meet the WWC requirements that it needs to be simple and stable at all costs. Simple meaning that you don't have to be an electrical engineer or marine biologist to produce results. No unnecessary equipment or complexities. Stable meaning equipment is chosen based on reliability over features, relies on time-tested proven methods, elimination of failure points, and over-reliance on technology. In addition to that, to meet BRS requirements, everything needs to be applicable to a home or office environment, meaning that it respects that reefers work, sleep, and travel, so we're frequently away from the tank. The system has a reasonable amount of maintenance for a home environment and needs to be reasonably quiet and attractive. We also want to fulfill the commitment to building a hybrid system that will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels most reefers can follow and expect to achieve very similar results. In that spirit, we're going to attempt to offer 3 options in each case: an option where low cost is a priority, common option, which is often that balance of cost and features, and a high-end option, which often costs double or triple, but comes with legit advantages for those that value or require them. Lastly, we're going to implement one option on the Red Sea XXL 750. This will probably be the high-end option, but in conjunction with that, we're also going to implement an option with something as small as a Red Sea E Series 170, which is a 37-gallon all-in-one convertible tank. Emphasis here will be low cost, simple and stable results in a reasonable sized tank with lower equipment investments. I can tell you both Zach and Jason here at BRS have been able to do it in 60-gallon cubes, so there's no reason that we can't do it here with the E170. Lastly, we're also going to convert the BRS 160 over to the new hybrid method, because showing the results of a brand new smaller and larger tank is one thing, but most of you already have tanks, so even more valuable will be how and why and what results we get from converting the BRS 160 over. So that's what you're going to see over the next 6 months or so: development of the BRS WWC method, and then more important than anything else, show you the legit results along the way. Following these 3 tanks and the evolution of the discussion will hopefully create a clear path to success for many reefers who are otherwise struggling with their SPS dominant tanks. willing to put in the time, but not just finding the same successes as the WWC team has achieved. I will say there is an obvious monetary barrier with this many corals in the WWC tanks, but this is a hobby. For some, it will be creating all of this overnight. For others, it's a many-year path watching the tank evolve with many larger colonies rather than tons of smaller colonies.
So just under
Understanding that reefing isn't the
725.
cheapest hobby out there, this is the kind of tank that doesn't have to break the bank, just a component of a longer-term goal. However, for someone, it's going to be free because BRS, WWC, and the Reef community
mix up number 2.
$20,000 Dream Tank giveaway this month. So not only is all the gear free, but WWC is also giving away $5,000 in coral to stock it to the brim. It's a Red Sea XXL 750, which is one of the biggest tanks they make, chock full of Ecotech, Neptune, Octopus, BRS, and tons of other gear. So click that link in the lower right or head on over to the site and hit on free prizes to sign up. This week on Reef to Reef, we're asking, is there anything in particular that you would like to see us cover in detail in this series? The link to that thread is down in the description below. Next week, the first episode of the hybrid system with filtration. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and the instant notification bell. If you like what we're doing here, let us know with a quick thumbs up. See you next week with another episode of BRS TV.
Coño, señorita.
Today on BRS TV, we explored the first component of the BRS WWC hybrid system implemented both here on the Red Sea Reefer XXL 750, the smaller all-in-one Red Sea E Series 170, and the BRS 160 with source water and salt. And all this month, giving away the $20,000 Dream Tank complete with a ridiculous $5,000 in corals from WWC and sponsored by the awesome community at Reef to Reef.
All right, I'm gonna go crazy on this one.
Hey, I'm Ryan, your host of BRS TV. This week we have episode 6 of the BRS WWC hybrid system. In this series, we're developing a method of dealing with almost every major reefing topic, then assembling them into one cohesive system that, above all else, is simple and stable. This hybrid system will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels almost anyone can follow and expect to achieve very similar results. Hopefully exploring these methods in a manner where, regardless of experience level in the hobby, you can learn something new or use WWC and BRS teams' experiences to refine our knowledge. You can see here we have the tank already up and running and starting that longer WWC cycle that we've been talking about, something that we dive deeper into in coming weeks. Without going into the whys yet,
longer
you already
cycle,
see a
let's
sneak peek of some of the hybrid choices made for the XXL 750, all of which are very different than the BRS 160. It's going to be interesting to explore. As they say, the proof is in the results. Today is the first day where we really start to explore the most important components of reefing. So we're going to explore what we believe to be the 8 core components of a successful reefing system: filtration, flow, lighting, the cycle, chemistry, coral nutrition, husbandry, and the maintenance rhythm. In that spirit, we're going to start the conversation on filtration today, but more specifically, simple, stable filtration. Filtration consists of 4 major components: fresh and saltwater filtration, ammonia filtration, organic particulates and dissolved organic filtration, and then filtering excess phosphate and nitrate. Even though it's not the most exciting component of a reef tank like this to start a series with, it just makes sense to start off with the source and filtration of fresh water and salt water for our reef tanks. Many of you probably heard me say this before, but it's often actually helpful to think about the entire system here. Not just what we're trying to maintain in a reef tank, but more so that we're trying to maintain water. As long as we get flow and lighting right, an awesome reef tank is at least partially just the net result of maintaining awesome water. So today we're going to set legit expectations for the benefits of producing and filtering appropriate quality fresh and salt water. Some near universally agreed upon information related to that. A few elements still being debated, the individual WWC and BRS approaches, along with the combined hybrid that produces a simple, stable method for a standard home tank. So what is reasonable to expect from putting effort into source fresh and saltwater quality? Well, the tank water will never be better than what you start with, so most reefers will agree that starting with the best, or at least cost-effective and reasonable quality water is a key component of long-term success. That said, it's not immediately obvious how putting effort into this will materialize in results. In many cases, you can actually see the visual results with healthier corals, but success here might actually be more about avoiding issues or making reefing simpler than anything. To be frank, most of the effort put into fresh or saltwater quality are more likely to result in the lack of issues than it is to be called out as an obvious benefit. All of us are bound to run into some issues over time, often with specific corals or algae, sometimes resulting in unexplainable mortality. In many ways, eliminating potential causes is the best way to prevent these types of issues to begin with, or hone in on the real causes later. So in the end, the focus on appropriate quality fresh and salt water to begin with is at the core of reefing and ensuring that initial water quality is never an issue. I think it's important to remember saltwater is basically fish and coral's atmosphere in the same way that air or gases produce our atmosphere. In our case, the quality of air between, say, Alaska and major metropolitan areas is distinctly different. Poor air quality makes it difficult to respirate or breathe, will irritate our eyes, nose, and throat tissue. Prolonged exposure to polluted air can cause more serious health issues. This doesn't happen to everyone, but there's no question about it, it happens to many. Much rarer extreme levels of toxins like carbon monoxide, chlorine gas, ammonia, or smoke-related gases can be fatal. All obviously much more serious in a closed environment where toxins can dissipate much slower or even build up, like inside of a small room, garage, or home. For today's topic, inside a relatively small glass box of water. So in the reef tank, the expectations are pretty similar. They're often disinfectants like chlorine, which can be immediately fatal, ammonia, which can be fatal, but at common levels, more likely to prevent fish's respiratory system from working properly, causing stress and making it more susceptible to other issues. Outside of that, it's a pretty long list of what I would describe as irritants, which could result in lack of polyp or tissue extension, or just make the corals more susceptible to other diseases or stresses. Not likely to affect all corals, could be very well the reason why some of the weaker or more stressed corals have occasional unexplained mortality. Lastly, there's some contaminants in the water like phosphate, nitrate, and silica, which are generally fairly small additions compared to other sources like fish food, but all the same, undesirable daily or weekly additions. These are not toxic per se, but they can promote some pretty undesirable algae or other pest organism growth, which is obviously pretty undesirable as well. Right or wrong, I think preventing or treating pest organisms like algae and some bacterial issues is one of the primary reasons reefers put effort into producing high quality, fresh, and salt water. So end of story, not in every case, but in a vast majority, effort put into fresh and saltwater quality should result in at least a few of those benefits: increased polyp and tissue health, reduced irritation, potentially increased resistance to other irritants or biological issues, reduced algae or pest organism growth, and hopefully even long-term reductions in sporadic unexplained mortalities. So some of this is obviously ambiguous, mostly related that there are no blanket statements here, because all of this is 100% related to the fact that all of our source water in our homes is drastically different, and why some reefers with untreated well water and the lowest quality salt out there can potentially produce some really awesome results, while others with the same strategy will perpetually struggle and never know why. So which of these benefits you will personally experience is 100% dependent on what's in your water, where your city gets its water from. Are there farms with herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers near you? What kind of disinfectant is used? How old is your city or home's plumbing system? What metals are in it? And a list of other unknowns. More or less, since only a few reefers will ever research these types of things, proper treatment of the water is more or less just peace of mind that you don't have to ever worry about any of this. In terms of salt mixes, I think the advantages are even more ambiguous. This isn't like tap water, which in no way is designed to be used in a reef tank. Salt mixes were absolutely designed for this specific purpose, and I think it's reasonable to believe that none of them are overtly toxic. And I've seen reefers be successful with almost all of them. I've used many salts, and there are none of them what I would say don't use. But I also know that they're not all the same. Some are absolutely higher quality than others, either because the raw material sources are better, the mixing process and consistency is better, or your desired elements are included and they're mixed to the levels desired for your tank. So what legit benefits can you expect by using one of the better salts? Some do have fewer irritants than others, some do have more elements and better batch consistency, but I think those really result in hard to define biological benefits, at least something that is directly attributable to using one salt mix over another. Again, more about peace of mind. In many ways, the
That's
lack of
crazy to
issues
just
or
dump your
unexplained
whole entire
mortalities is the best sign that you're
5-gallon
on the
into
right
it
track.
like that.
However, there are some definitive benefits with some salts. Some are legitimately just visually cleaner than others, and it can be seen with the crud collected at the bottom of the mixing buckets. I guess somewhat undesirable to add to the tank itself, but also undesirable to have to clean in the mixing vat constantly. It's pretty unwise to leave those contaminants in the dirty vat because of the risk of dosing a large concentration of this unknown contaminants to the tank. It's hard to say what's in this, but I can say with almost near 100% certainty, it's not something that a vast majority of reefers would want to intentionally dose to the tank. Outside of that, some salt mixes also maintain major elements at levels very similar to your tank, meaning reduced work and often costs testing and attempting to correct calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium levels before using the salt in the tank. Regardless of brand, many reefers will certainly find a salt mix that reasonably matches their desired reef tank parameters to be the most simple and stable approach. So understanding what the common benefits of proper fresh and salt water are on each of these reefing topics, the first thing that we're always going to start with is the information which is nearly universally agreed upon by the reefing community, or at least which is backed with significant amounts of science, starting with freshwater. If it is present, we all know for sure we need to treat the disinfectant and ammonia in the water. No one wants to dose that to the tank. If that's all you care about, Brightwell's Erase CL Dechlorinator and Hikari's Chloramex will also address chlorine, as well as approaching half of the municipal water supplies out there that are now using chloramines, which also contains toxic ammonia. Outside of that, at present, almost all of us would also like to remove common contaminants like silt, rust, or corrosion, many disinfectant byproducts, broken down herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers, nitrate and phosphate, undesirable minerals like iron, copper, silica, lead, which can come from unnoticed corrosion in your home's pipes or just in the groundwater. Again, every water source is different, and so there are no universally true statements on if your water contains any of that. So what I can share is what's in our water here in Minneapolis, which is generally considered very clean and only 90 to 100 TDS to begin with. Most reefers wouldn't go through this effort, but the best place to get an initial idea of your water quality is to find your city's water quality report, which is issued each year. In our case, they're showing 0.7 parts per million fluoride, 0.41 nitrate, 3.14 chloramines, and a bit over half of the total organic carbon removed. 0.08 parts per million copper and 1.6 parts per billion lead, as well as a variety of disinfection byproducts which are considered harmful and regulated. One thing to note here is this is just an average and doesn't consider the age or condition of your home's plumbing, and all of this can change at any time. For instance, this year my wife noticed that the water in our tub had a green tint rather than the crystal clear blue tint it should have. This is my actual tub here. She called the city, they came out and tested and identified that our entire area had higher than desired organic compounds in the water due to the conditions in the Mississippi River, which supplies Minneapolis water. It was still under legal limits, and more or less, they just told us we have to wait it out. We also tested the water here at BRS using the Hawk DR3900. Our test resulted in 3.5 parts per million chloramines, and related to that, 0.75 parts per million ammonia, 10.1 parts per million silica, 0.53 phosphate, and 2.3 parts per million nitrate. So I think it's pretty safe to say that basically no one would want to use our city water in a reef tank. Again, keep in mind, this is what would otherwise be considered fairly clean water source in our hobby at 100 TDS. So it's often more about what the TDS is than the actual number. So some of this or other issues are going to be in a majority of water supplies, and why RO and RODI water is so popular with reefers. These systems are pretty easy to install, fairly affordable, and provide the peace of mind that reefers don't have to be concerned about their water or what could be in it. So next is salt water. So what is universally agreed upon? Well, I'd say three things, starting with first, none of them will prevent success. I strongly believe that you can have a successful reef tank with any of the popular options. Second, the quality of the raw materials used between the different aquarium brands absolutely varies. Something I think we showed pretty definitively with our 5-part series on various aquarium additives. The raw material source and following filtration steps at the plant plays a huge role in removing undesirable contaminants. I'd certainly like to perform that same type of independent ICP MS lab testing on salts at some point to get a clear window into this, but it's pretty expensive. I'll do my best to see if we can get it budgeted, but we're putting most of our resources in that BRS-TV investigates and the coral experiments at the moment. In the meantime, it isn't overtly clear which of the various salts will have the highest quality with the fewest contaminants. It's kind of up to the manufacturers to convey that quality in a convincing manner. Red Sea does that with the My Batch ICP testing, where you can enter the serial number and it gives you a detailed report on your specific batch of salt. There's a significant amount of traceability and accountability attached to sharing that kind of information. Other salts do that by leveraging external standards like pharmaceutical grade materials. Tropic Marin clearly states pharmaceutical grade right on the front of the bucket. I can say in our 5-week-long series on additive quality, pharmaceutical grade materials significantly outperformed all of what I would call aquarium grade additives. As someone who has sourced reefing materials for nearly a decade, I personally believe this independent quality standard associated with pharmaceutical grade is probably one of the most valuable, sustainable, and reliable quality standards. Third, and somewhat related to that, some impurities can actually be seen with the naked eye, and also related to that, ease of use and all that crud that forms in your saltwater mixing bin over time. I don't think any of us like cleaning that out, and an almost universally true statement. But right now, some of you are nodding your heads more than others. That's because some of these salts have a lot more of this crud than others, so some of you are using salts that just don't have these visual contaminants. This could be contaminant binding additives that settle out, or organics, or general impurities from less pure source materials. It's really hard to say. Just to give you an idea of the differences, here at BRS we run our salt water through a sediment filter so we don't dose all that stuff to the tank, but more so because we go through so much salt water here that it's important to keep the containers clean, and this is the easiest way to do that. That running the salt water through a sediment filter after the mixing reduces the amount of muck in the storage containers by like 95% and corresponding reduction in maintenance. Our system is a bit more elaborate, but I think you could do this with a BRS reactor and a depth sediment filter like the 5-micron RO-Save.Z. But in either case, some salts have a pretty considerable amount of brown crud in them and others don't. This is an example of an entire bucket of Tropic Marin salt gone through a sediment filter. You can see there's drastically less crud in it, likely associated with the independently monitored standards related to pharmaceutical grade source materials. There are absolutely options here which obviously mix a lot cleaner than others, so if that matters to you and you are getting a ton of crud in your storage tank, there are other options out there. Lastly, some salt manufacturers just have better mixing equipment and processes, so some are certainly mixed at the factory better than others. Inconsistent major, minor, and trace elements, not just from bucket to bucket, but within the bucket itself, is a fairly common issue in our hobby. I wish I could say I found the one that does this the best, but all of them vary to some degree. Only way to identify which one meets your standards is to test them after they're mixed, which is always wise. Alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium would be ideal, but alkalinity and calcium is smart, and I would consider alkalinity an absolute must in most cases. Keep in mind that many of them are only going to be accurate to 5 to 10% from the stated levels. Okay. Our hobby grade test kits and how you personally perform or read them varies pretty wildly, so it isn't that you get the exact number that you're looking for, but more so that the number that you get from your testing is consistent. I will say it's nearly impossible for the entire bucket to be 100% homogeneous and every last element perfectly mixed throughout as well. Regardless of what anyone says, some of the salts will stratify out based on weight or grain size during travel around the country or in many cases world, meaning there'll be some areas within that bucket which is more concentrated with some elements than others. So even though very few reefers do this because it's slightly more expensive, you can eliminate a lot of that by buying smaller sized buckets or bags of salt and using the entire thing at the same time. The Red Sea 55 and Tropic Marin 80-gallon buckets are good examples. Both are about 50 cents a gallon in this size, and the savings is about a few cents to about 8 cents a gallon over the larger salt bucket sizes. For a 100-gallon tank doing 10% weekly water changes, that's like $1 to $3 a month difference. Depending on how much salt you use a month, the bucket size may or may not be material savings versus the advantages. Keep in mind that these smaller size buckets, even if you don't use the entire bucket in a single use, it's still easier to manually mix the dry salt prior to use and improve that homogeneous mix. Okay, so moving on after discussing what most of the community agrees upon, what about those things where there's still some debate on? First, do you even need RO water? There's certainly reefers out there that use well water or dechlorinated tap water. However, it's not really a debate, It's just that those reefers have suitable quality water to begin with in their area, either identified through research or in some cases luck. But even those reefers would likely agree on a whole that most reefers would likely be better off using RO water. This is particularly true when you're attempting to care for more sensitive corals like SPS, where just a couple losses probably cost more than the RO system itself. So at minimum, a vast majority of long-term reefers are going to use reverse osmosis for their tanks. Okay, so on to the second debatable. Do you really need that DI stage after your RO system? On this one, I would wager to say that maybe 30% of reefers probably don't. The RO system is removing around 96 to 99% of what's in the water and likely to remove vast majority of what's critical in their water. For most people, that last 1 to 4% won't cause issues. However, without perfectly performing carbon blocks, RO systems can miss many things like chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, disinfection byproducts, and dissolved gases like ammonia. It's that last one that will affect the most reefers because somewhere between 30 and 50% of reefers' municipal water supplies are now using ammonia-containing chloramines to treat the water. Very often, a good portion of that ammonia will pass straight through the RO membrane. And today, the reason why RODI is probably 100 times more common in reefing than RO alone is simple peace of mind. Most reefers don't want to mess around with trying to figure out if the water's good enough and rather just have it covered with this fairly low-cost filter. Related to that, there has been a somewhat dated debate on if chloramines really matter. I think that's because the standard 4-stage RODI system will produce 0 TDS water, and the chlorine portion of the chloramines will ultimately be removed. So at face value, it might seem like chloramines are not a big concern. However, that misses a few pretty significant considerations. First, the ammonia from the chloramines will often pass freely through the membrane and not be detected by the TDS meter. Second, the chloramines rapidly deplete a standard carbon block, offering less than 100 gallons of product water, where a chloramine-specific carbon block can last 10 or even more times as long, and the blocks themselves remove a portion of the ammonia entirely by transitioning it into nitrogen gas. The payoff of using the right filter for the right application is pretty undeniable at this point. The undepleted carbon block will also work longer in all the other contaminants that they're designed for as well. Depending on the other aspects of the water like pH, properly treating chloramines at the carbon block can result in longer RO membrane life. At high pHs, the chlorine can split off and oxidize the membrane. Proper treatment can also reduce DI resin consumption or performance in many cases as well. In the end, the only real change to a standard RO system to treat for chloramines in common water supplies is running 2 carbon blocks rather than 1, and blocks designed for chloramines. In this case, the advantage so greatly outweighs the small cost. I think this is why this went from a hotly debated topic 10 years ago to something very few reefers discuss any longer. Most reefers are simply treating for chloramines properly now. In fact, here at BRS, we just skipped the entire thing and sourced our blocks from the leader in chloramine filtration in the world. Luckily, what makes the filter awesome at chloramine performance is just what makes them even better at chlorine performance. So it's a win-win, and why we call them universal carbon blocks, it's just not a concern. The system will work regardless of the type of municipal disinfectant used. Last of the big debates is, can you use natural seawater, often scooped right out of the ocean? There's some debate to that as the type of organisms that might be in it and the pollution that might come from near-shore collection. In the end, if you're willing to go collect it, I think you can absolutely use natural seawater, and there'll very likely be some benefits associated with that, particularly if you live near an area where water is supporting thriving corals. I think it goes without saying that it'd be best if you collected it from a place that's far away from freeways, industry, marinas, and other areas which can have petroleum or other chemical pollutants. Reefers will go to various degrees to get the best natural seawater, often driving boats offshore, filtering with a filter sock, sediment filter, carbon, or sometimes even UV. I think it's pretty debatable how much of that is needed. I think I'd send it through some type of particulate filter at minimum. The UV is probably pretty extreme, but understand if you had 10 grand in fish in the tank. Okay, so what is a WWC method for producing fresh and salt water? First off, they use RO only and don't bother with DI. They're using a giant carbon tower, commercial series of RO membranes, and a huge booster pump, which gets the TDS all the way down to 0 right out of the gate. They also have tested for various water elements and have a decade of experience with their particular water supply, so they're in the minority that has little value from adding DI to the system. Because they're a business that goes through thousands of gallons of water a month, it's well worth the research to identify the appropriate solution. However, speaking to Josh and Lou at WWC, this isn't the kind of thing that they would recommend to everyone without putting in the effort to identify initial water quality and it's also not really the type of system that would be cost effective to be installed in a home environment. In terms of salt, historically, they have used Brightwell's Neomarine way more than anything else, but from time to time, someone sends them a pallet of free salt or an insane deal, and in a business environment, they have to use it, but they always go back to Brightwell just because it's been part of their long-term results. Okay, so what do we do here at BRS for freshwater? Well, I've already shared how many contaminants are in our Minneapolis water, and there's just no way around it. We have to use RODI water. In fact, because we have some specific issues, mostly related to the high pH of our water, around 10, we use the Pro Series resins to treat the silica and ammonia gas properly. The Pro Series resins have a very low and high pH in the individual cation and anion resins, which rapidly change contaminants into forms that sometimes easier for the resin to remove. It's just the best way to treat our water here. For salt, we've used a mix of salts here over the years, often with different options at different water stations throughout the shop, mostly HW salt for those that like the clean synthetic approach to salt mix, and Red Sea for those that like that somewhat more natural dehydrated sea salt. As of a couple months ago, we're all using Tropic Marin Pro Reef just because it was impossible to not want to try that pharmaceutical grade salt after all of our in-depth testing on the additives. Combined with that, I think we'll likely continue to use it for the foreseeable future because it mixes clean, both in terms of what I'm not adding to the tank, but also drastically reducing the maintenance on what we have in those storage containers and pumps. As I mentioned before, we also run those sediment filters on many of the systems to even further reduce impurities and system maintenance. One of the things we get asked a lot is where do we get these containers for water storage? Most reefers use something like a Brute trash can, but the best options are certainly larger containers designed for water or liquid storage. Sometimes you can find them at a local plumbing or farm supplies, but the easiest way is just to go to Norwesco's website and use their tool to find a local supplier. And warn you that they're not cheap, but they are nice and they come in all types of shapes and sizes. My personal preference at this point is to use those that have an open top and a lid for easing cleaning when it's needed. We also like to use a single pump with a couple of valves to do both the mixing and movement of water. Okay, so what is the BRS WWC hybrid to fresh and salt water? Well, just as a reminder, to meet WWC's requirements, it needs to be simple and stable at all costs. Simple meaning you don't have to be an electrical engineer or marine biologist to produce a result, no unnecessary equipment or complexities. Stable meaning equipment is chosen based on the reliability over other features, relies on time-tested proven methods, elimination of failure points, and over-reliance on technology. In addition to that, to meet BRS requirements, the method needs to be applicable to a home or office environment, meaning that it respects that reefers work, sleep, and travel, and are frequently away from the tank. The method has to have a reasonable amount of maintenance. For a home environment, it needs to be reasonably quiet. We also want to fulfill the commitment to building a hybrid system that will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels almost anyone can follow and expect to achieve very similar results. In that spirit, we're going to attempt to offer 3 options in each case. An option where low cost is a priority, common option, which is that balance of cost and features, and the high-end option, which costs double or triple, but comes with legit advantages for those that value or require them. So applying all that to freshwater, I don't think anyone will be surprised that zero TDS RODI water is the simplest and stablest approach to producing freshwater at home. You can buy it at almost any fish store, but for most it's simpler just to make it at home than dry buckets of water around. It's pretty easy for both the WWC and BRS teams to agree on RODI water is a general nationwide recommendation because it's unrealistic for most people to know what's in their water, and then even then it changes over time.
That'll be a monumental moment.
And more stable to treat the water appropriately.
We've been setting this up now, I think, almost like 3 weeks.
Within that, a lower cost option is a simple 4-stage RODI system that one way or another will treat a vast majority of water supplies. There's heavy reliance on that DI stage to treat for some of the harder to remove elements or inadequacies of the other filters in some cases, but it will produce zero TDS water, which is suitable for a reef tank in a majority of cases, and also the lowest cost suitable RODI system for a reef tank. A 4-stage unit is also portable, easy to install, and I'd also like to note it's super easy to add another stage at a later date if you ever need to. You're not making a lifelong decision here. The option that balances functions with cost is a 5-stage RODI system which has 2 carbon blocks, preferably with universal blocks which treat for both common disinfectants well. 5-stage systems is what a vast majority of experienced reefers seem to use because it covers them in 90% plus of cases, uses each of the filter stages as designed, and doesn't put an over-reliance on any stage or filter to work properly. That high-end
Hopefully I can
option,
have
which
the
is going to be
same
effective in
up
basically
and run
every
it
instance
tonight.
and produce the absolute highest quality water, is not surprisingly a 7-stage system that has a dual
Oh, I forgot
universal
to
carbon blocks,
look at
as
this
well as a
water.
cation and anion resin stage that's separate at the end. In fact, I'd say this is the set it and forget it approach because
right
there's
now would be
almost
the time.
nothing that you're not covered for. Even though we do recommend something like this for types of water that we have here in Minneapolis, I'd say only 10% of reefers are going to have water supplies that absolutely require this level of filtration. That said, by keeping the DI resin separate at the end, the 7-stage pro units like this may actually be cheaper in the long run because it saves a lot of DI resin costs by only changing the one that's needed rather than both in a mixed bed. All three are color changing, so it's simple and requires few changeouts and maintenance as well. In any case, all three will work in a vast majority of cases, upgradable if you run into challenges, and regardless of the one you pick, your source of fresh water will not be a preventative element to success with your reef tank.
36.
Okay, in terms of salt, I think simple means
Okay, add
one
some more
thing
water to
predominantly.
this.
Pick one that is at least close to the same calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium as your tank. Spending time testing and fixing a salt is neither simple or stable. Simple to me also means selecting one that doesn't require me to clean my storage bin frequently. How often that is an individual choice, and you could run a sediment filter like we do, but I think that's unnecessary equipment when you can select a salt option which just doesn't require that. Lastly, stable, the lowest cost salt that meets the above requirements is probably just fine and will not prevent results. For lower cost salts, I don't have a specific brand recommendation on other than general advice of whatever's on sale and close to your tank's parameters and clean. The option which balances function with cost would be a salt that demonstrates to a convincing degree that they are capable of better results, meaning mixed consistently, contains necessary elements, or uses better raw materials. Red Sea's My Batch, WWC's results with Brightwell, our results with HW, and Tropic Marin's pharmaceutical grade standards, all being fairly compelling reasons to believe all or one of these things. All of them in the 40 to 48 cents a gallon range, so just a couple bucks a month difference. All of the synthetically refined options just being a few cents more than the others. I don't think the price difference here of a couple bucks a month is going to play a major role in the decision for most reefers. Pick the one that best suits your tank desires and needs. Then lastly, the high-end or simplest and stablest option, I think, is to identify your favorite salt, but then use those smaller, easier to mix buckets where stratification during travel is less of an issue and consistent results in the mixing vat will be more stable. Ideally, using the entire bucket all at once. This isn't just consistent results of all major elements, but also avoids small pockets of highly concentrated trace elements. Okay, so what are we using here at BRS for our 3 hybrid tanks? This is probably the only case where we'll be using the same solution for all 3 tank types, the XXL 750, the E170, and the BRS 160. In this case, we do know what's in our water, and there's no way around it. We're going to treat for it properly. The main issue there is we have that near legal limit of chloramine, which means that we also have a ton of ammonia. But worse yet, we have a pH of about 10, so the ammonia is in that gas form, which passes straight through the membrane, and in many cases, standard mixed bed DI resin as well. So the most simple and the most stable and best practice means we'll be using a 7-stage Pro RODI system with the separate resins followed by a mixed bed. This will remove basically everything properly, even the ammonia gas, because of the extreme pH the cation and anion resin stages. Because it is what the BRS team is using here on a daily basis. We're also going to use the Tropic Marin, which uses the pharmaceutical grade components and also leaves the least amount of crud in the tanks of any of the salts we've used. We also have large vats that we can mix the entire bucket all at once to eliminate any inconsistencies from various salts stratified in the buckets. Again, something a bit easier to do at home with smaller buckets. Okay, so that's really all there is to a method of producing simple and stable fresh and salt water for our reef tanks. It may seem like a long path to end up at using RODI water and the benefits to various approaches to salt mix, but I certainly hope we clarified the why as much as the how, which is an important step of understanding and implementing any method. Hopefully we answered most of the questions related to this pretty completely, but there's always more to learn, so in that spirit of continual progression, let us know what you'd like to know more about. I think there's always going to be some unanswered questions on these topics that BRS team investigates can dig into in the future, like exactly how much longer do universal carbon blocks last, professional ICP MS testing results on various salt mixes, do depth sediment filters really last longer, maybe ICP testing on various natural seawater locations, you name
feel
it.
this way.
Outside of that, the BRS team just started answering quick questions with our Facebook group,
'cause you gotta
Ask
get over
BRS
this.
TV. So join that for some fairly rapid answers to any
gotta be in
questions you
that-
might have
in
about
that
your
checkered
tank.
area.
Don't forget to sign up for our $20,000 tank giveaway. Click that link in the lower left or head on over to the site and click free prizes to sign up.
It's
This
short.
week's Reef to Reef poll is what do you think is the best salt out there? A lot of us
Yeah.
can't wait to see the results, so head on over there with that link over in the description. As
Really
always,
close.
if you like what we're doing here, hit that thumbs up and subscribe button. Even better, the notification bell for instant notification of our releases. See you next week where we cover the BRS WWC's in-depth approach to proper biological or ammonia filtration.
Okay.
Oh no.
Ah,
I think we can
that's
turn
the
it
sound
on.
of someone who's misplaced
My debit card.
their debit card.
It's not over this little.
Not at the gas pump,
So, like
or the
literally.
checkout counter, or the roof of your car. Now, if he has the Chase mobile app, he can use card lock.
Wait,
Yeah.
I could just lock my
I have
card.
to weigh this
Yep,
out.
just a few tippy taps on his phone, and that
Like that-
sound,
that-
that's
the first
peace
time I
of mind
did-
from Chase.
725 grams,
Mobile devices. Message and data rates may apply.
and it was like
Chase Bank
a
NA,
little bit
member FDIC.
higher, but it was like pretty much perfect. And then
Today
the
on
second time I did
BRS TV,
121
we
or
explore the
721
second
grams,
component of the
and it was like
hybrid system,
higher instead of
biological
than this time. So
filtration,
it's like,
the
you know,
great sand debate, as well as some aquascaping tips.
it varies.
Implemented
Yeah.
here in both the Red Sea Reaper XXL 750, smaller all-in-one Red Sea E Series 170, and the BRS 160. And it's probably impossible that you haven't signed up for the 20 grand Dream
Yeah.
Tank giveaway at this point,
I guess we go
including the
afterwards.
5
We
grand
haven't
in
been to
corals
any
from
of this stuff.
WWC.
I mean, the
but
party's
this is
in
your
Pinecrest.
last chance. The drawing just a few days
It
away.
says it's in Pinecrest, so.
Hey, I'm Ryan, your host of BRS
For
TV.
sure.
This week we have episode 6 of the BRS WWC hybrid system. In this series, we're developing a method
to
of
look.
dealing with almost every major reefing topic and assembling them into one cohesive system that, above all else, is simple and stable. This hybrid system will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels. Almost anyone can follow and expect to achieve very similar results. Hopefully exploring these methods in a manner where, regardless of experience level in the hobby, learn something new or use WWC and BRS team's experiences to refine our knowledge. In this series, we're going to explore what we believe to be the 8 core components of a successful reefing system: filtration, lighting, flow, the cycle,
It's a
chemistry,
gambling night,
coral
or is it a
nutrition,
fancy night?
husbandry, and the maintenance rhythm. In that spirit, we're continuing that conversation on filtration today, but more specifically, simple, stable filtration. Filtration consists of 4 major components: fresh and saltwater filtration, biological filtration, organic particulates and dissolved organic filtration,
Thought
and
I was
filtering out
there.
those excess phosphates and nitrates. Today is all about that second element, biological filtration, which centers largely around filtering and processing ammonia. Like most other individual components of reefing, this may seem simple at face value, but the more we dig in, the better the chances that we get it right, which is particularly important with the more sensitive species of coral like SPS, which also happen to have a significant investment worth protecting. So what's reasonable to expect from putting effort into biological filtration and stability? Because it's only worth doing if it produces legit results. Well, first, your fish will be healthier, and you'll likely experience reduced fish mortality, which is pretty obvious. Second, some approaches are absolutely better than others, meaning you might be properly filtering ammonia, but also collecting tons of detritus and organic pollutants. More or less small time bombs in the tank. With proper biological filtration design, you can completely avoid all of these longer-term challenges. Some options are also simpler and more stable than others, meaning they don't require complex equipment to
420.
work, tons of maintenance, or prone to catastrophic failures from something as simple as a short power outage. So simply put, effort put into proper biological filtration will result in healthier livestock and a simpler, more stable system because of reduced dependence on maintenance, reduced long-term pollutants, and related challenges. We can avoid almost all of the catastrophic failures of the biological filtration system. In terms of what that means for an SPS coral, there's one thing that you're going to hear again over and over in this series.
732.
Overall stability of the system means not just better growth, but reduction in coral mortality, but also absolutely shows itself in dramatically improved coloration. So let's start with the elements reefers nearly all universally agree
725.
on. I think that begins with the fact that decaying food, fish waste, and organics in general produces ammonia. Fish in the tank also add a lot of ammonia to
721.
the tank through their gills. In turn, ammonia is very toxic to the fish because ammonia in the surrounding water makes it very difficult for the fish to rid themselves of the ammonia in their gills. So at the end of the day, we need to remove the ammonia from the tank rapidly, simply, and stably to protect the inhabitants of the tank. There are a variety of ways to filter or process ammonia from the tank, but probably exceeding 99% of reef tanks rely on bacteria to process ammonia into safer forms of nitrogen, like nitrite and nitrate, and in some cases even nitrogen gas, which essentially bubbles right out of the tank.
Between 720
In fact,
and
it'd be near
740 grams.
impossible to prevent the bacteria from populating the tank. It's really more about how fast it will populate than anything. Dry rock will be the slowest, wet rock will be faster, and you can rapidly speed up both by just simply adding bacteria to the tank with options like Dr. Tim's One and Only, as well as Brightwell's Microbacter 7. Solutions like those bacteria starters or boosters have made establishing appropriately sized bacteria colonies capable of processing ammonia rapidly a pretty easy process. I can tell you that we've used these types of products for years now, and there's no question they're effective at establishing bacterial-based ammonia filtration. The only real question is making sure that you're adding enough bacteria to match the amount of fish that you're adding. You can, of course, allow the bacteria to populate on its own, but these products just make it a lot faster. In support of how fast the bacteria can process the ammonia, I think we can all agree that's largely based on how efficient the system design is at flowing the ammonia-containing water over a surface which has been colonized by the bacteria, because a vast majority of the bacteria lives on a surface of some kind. Simply put, if you have almost no fish or feed very little, then limited thought needs to go into this. But if you're feeding more organics and housing more fish, there's a higher demand on the filtration system's ability to rapidly process the ammonia. It needs to be fast enough to not either harm or otherwise stress the tank's inhabitants. Fact is, this gets very little thought because it's basically an invisible process because almost no one tests for ammonia after the initial cycle. If you know you have less than a stable system, a very minimal filtration surface area,
your hand, I don't want to wet it.
randomly losing fish, or just can't seem to keep the fish healthy, or experience constant outbreaks of disease, I certainly would not rule out either toxic levels of ammonia, less than toxic but sustained levels of ammonia, or periodic bursts, or just those really low levels that stress out the fish and make them susceptible to parasites and illness. It's always been somewhat common for reefers to add rock to their sumps for additional filtration, but in the last decade, reefers have begun commonly using ceramic media like Green Pure and Brightwell's Export BioBricks. These types of medias have tremendous amounts of internal and external surface area and are absolutely effective solutions to colonize bacteria to filter the tank, particularly if they're implemented in a manner where water is delivered to them in a reliable manner. The ceramic media's biggest benefit is a tremendous amount of surface area in a small, compact form factor, meaning it doesn't take up much room in the sump, and it's easy to clean around them. Cleaning around 100 pounds of rock can be pretty darn difficult. This last piece of the universally agreed upon information some reefers might grill me for saying, but the BRS and WWC team strongly believe it's accurate, so I feel compelled to share it as a statement of fact. Sand is a very effective component of the bacterial filtration, but it's just not as simple and stable as other solutions. I'm in no way saying sand is bad or you shouldn't use it, but it's wise to be aware of the legit concerns, many of which reefers run into and have no idea about. First, sand just collects crud in the tank, meaning all kinds of organics and pollutants just settle out in the sand. Pods and other critters die in there over time, and the amount of organics just builds up. If it isn't cleaned consistently, the sand bed almost always smells like rotten eggs. More or less, there's just pollutants sitting in there waiting to be released or slowly leaked into the tank. This is obviously less of an issue if you're awesome about cleaning your sand or have a super effective livestock solution, but there's some healthy debate as to not just how effective that is on the entire tank, but also if the process of cleaning the sand releases the organics or other pollutants into the water. Something that's even more risky when the sand exceeds an inch or so of depth. However, even with shallow sand beds, sand gets blown around, so it's always deeper somewhere in the tank. Related to that, siphoning and cleaning the sand doesn't just stir everything up, but it also takes that top layer of sand, which has the most access to the ammonia in the water, and because of that, likely the most heavily colonized by the bacteria, and mixes that sand with the rest, leaving much of the bacteria that was filtering your tank now buried an inch deep with limited access to the tank's ammonia. Most stable and well-designed filtration systems are, of course, capable of compensating in other areas for both potential pollutants found in the sand and disruption to the bacterial filter, but it's very valuable for the average reefer to understand that any disruption to the sand, either intentional or unintentional, like a powerhead falling and blowing the sand around, can be a disruption in both water quality and stability. And while I think most of us agree sand looks nice, and a desirable element, keeping it clean and sharp looking is not always the simplest task. I think most reefers will still elect to have sand for a variety of reasons, but fully understanding the legit challenges helps avoid them or understand what's happening when you do encounter them so they're easier to solve. So in relation to biological filtration, what are the elements that are still being debated? Well, hold on here because I know there's a lot of them. I know ammonia filtration would seem simple and there's not a lot of debate here, but you might be surprised. I'm gonna jump right into it. The most hotly debated, first and foremost, is wet rock from the ocean better than dry rock from a cycle perspective? I think that depends on how you think of the cycle. If you're talking just about the ability to process ammonia, well, just out of the tank, I think there's no question live rock will cycle faster. However, dry rock with a bottle of Microbacter 7 might very well cycle faster than wet rock that hasn't been cured properly, so it's kind of debatable. However, if you think of cycling as much more than just bacteria and protecting the fish, meaning the process of getting a tank ready for corals, limiting pest algae growth, promoting calcareous coralline algae growth, and then just getting it stable enough for sensitive coral species like SPS, well, there's no doubt that live rock is much faster than dry rock. Rock from the ocean just gets a tank ready for corals faster than dry rock. Wet rock shipped in water like TBS or Tampa Bay saltwater rock, the fastest and the most biologically diverse. Live rock scrubbed clean for the weeks of handling and shipping, but shipped moist being more common and limited biodiversity, but always containing coralline algae and bacteria. Right behind that and rapidly emerging as a more common option, dry rock, which has been cured for months prior to sale. Very limited biodiversity, but in a much simpler and stable state than dry rock alone. So there's no right or wrong answer here, all past work, just weighing the balance of increased biodiversity, which of course means both beneficial, but also an equal emphasis on pests, with the cost of the rock and overall patience. There's also some degree of aquascape preferences attached to that decision as well. I know everyone wants some direction on the rock. I'll just say that newer reefers often want the most biodiversity and the quickest to
Yeah, it
grow
gets
tanks.
clear.
Intermediate reefers often want to avoid the pests that cause them to shut down their last tanks, but still want the fastest path to coral. However, the most experienced reefers often don't care about speed at this point and are focused on success, which can be best achieved with established wet live rock, but also as pest-free as rock as possible, or longer holistic cycles with dry rock. Thing is, the debate is kind of becoming a moot point here because true live rock is becoming more difficult to come by these days, and the cost is skyrocketing. I strongly believe the conversation is going to forcibly evolve to cure dry rock, which has been pre-soaked for months, or dry rock, which you just cure yourself. The pre-cured or soaked dry rock, probably the fastest, and I think probably the best option on stability, speed to corals, easiest to use, and hopefully limited to no pests, but also likely double to triple the cost, meaning 100 pounds of rock might be 600 to 900 rather than 300 for dry rock that you cure on your own. Moving on from rock, there are other ways of managing ammonia in the tank. I mentioned earlier sand as an important component. Well, the debatable portion of that is many reefers actually believe that sand is actually performing more of the filtration than the rock itself. The tiny particles of sand just represent a tremendous amount of available surface area. So I don't know if this is the case and it's different in each tank. I do think it's wise to consider this as possible, particularly if you're going to run a tank without sand. More rock, more attention to establishing or curing that rock, more surface area in the sump might be a wise consideration. Particularly if you feed a lot or have a ton of fish. Related to that, there is some debate as to the best placement of those high-density supplemental surface area additions like the Export BioBricks and Marine Pure. It was generally referenced at one point that they should be in a low-flow area of the tank to promote anaerobic areas in the media and related to that nitrate reduction. I just see more reefers putting them in higher flow areas of the sump now to increase contact with the water and related to that, increased ability to process the water. Common thought has also shifted that if they exist and effective, the anaerobic areas in the media like this is probably much closer to the surface than once thought. Some of these blocks also tend to get that rotten egg smell in low flow areas of the sump where they're not supplied with ample flow.
It's still a little bit away.
Water pounding on them because they will erode over time with that kind of force.
I do get a pump at Tyco and didn't have any.
At
least not at first glance. I didn't realize that they closed at 8. And I got there at 7:58. And I walked through and they had like to check out her purse out and shit. And I was like, oh. I'm like, my bad, you guys are closing? They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. I was like, your register's still open? They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. Give me 10 seconds. I think I know exactly what I need. And I went over there. I was like, nah, I don't.
There are also some ammonia absorbing medias out there that will directly filter ammonia for you. Some I just avoid entirely because it's far from stable unless you're going to monitor them for depletion. There's just no need for this, and it's completely an unnecessary expense. The only exception would be that zeolite media with the zeolite system. The zeolite does absorb some ammonia, and open and honest, it isn't clear when it's reached capacity, but there is a direct recommendation on when to change it, and the media is related to a variety of other processes in the zeolite system, so I would use that when running zeolite.
See what this water is saying.
There's no ammonia filter media that I would recommend using, and in fact, I'd recommend against. So one of the other huge debatables is how much surface area do I really need? I've heard everything from none, the glass is actually enough, to some pretty impressive extremes of how to incorporate huge tubs or external live rock sumps to filter the tank. There just isn't an answer to that I'm confident in sharing other than more is better. Look at the amount of rock that you have. Do you have sand? How much do you feed? How many fish do you have? And trust your gut. If it feels light, it probably is. The solution is pretty simple. Just add some rock to the sump, some ceramic media, and call it a day. I will say there are a lot of bare bottom tanks out there with minimal aquascapes. In fact, negative space is in and leaving room for coral growth even more so. It's pretty common now to not put hardly any rock in the top half of the tank to leave room for SPS coral growth and still allow for flow over the tops of the colonies. Another pretty big debatable is dosing bacteria after the cycle. Zeolite has you do it, Dr. Tim promotes it, Dr. Tim even has different bacteria for different purposes. Idea here is to promote the right bacteria strains to populate the tank, either for ongoing filtration or to solve common issues. I have to say, outside of zeolite's direct instruction to do so, I've never felt the need to dose standard bacteria. There may be some value, but nothing definitive that I've ever experienced or can suggest. However, there may be some value in the solution-based bacteria, as I tried Dr. Tim's waste-away time-release gel on a tank that had red slime or cyano issues, and it disappeared pretty rapidly, almost like a miracle. However, on another tank, it didn't have the same results, so the jury's still out. One thing I would note is these gel packs can be shipped anytime, but the liquid bacteria products should not be frozen solid. So in the dead of winter, I'd suggest picking them up at your local fish store rather than from an online shop like ours. The last debatable, but certainly not the least, I think is actually debatable if ammonia or ammonia filtration even matters to corals. I know it certainly doesn't matter as much to corals as it does fish. Many corals seem to tolerate ammonia without issue. You may even see some reefers create some insta-tanks. That's probably at least partially true, but I don't know if that type of mentality is actually entirely helpful, particularly if you want to maintain more finicky SPS corals. The mentality of simple and stable is what produces the results and the best. Okay, so all that said, what is a WWC approach to simple and stable ammonia filtration? I mean, I know all of you are going to be shocked here, but old, established rock. The older the better, the more established the better. There's literally not such a thing as too old. Some of the rock they use is a decade plus old. There are many reasons behind this that go way beyond simple ammonia filtration, and something that we'll cover in detail in the WWC cycle episode. Cycling means much more than just ammonia filtration. However, in the end here, they strongly believe in old, established rock whenever possible. There's also a lot of rock in these large tanks they maintain, so it's not necessary to put rock or other types of filtration in the sumps. In fact, Josh at WWC advocated pretty strongly against rock in the sump because it will just become a detritus and organic trap down there. It will be very hard to clean properly. They also do not use sand in the 900 or 500 or any SPS dominant tank.
Ready to turn it on? Look.
One, they simply cannot get a fraction of the flow they want with sand in the tank. It's a simple impossibility because it would blow all over. Since they're confident that proper flow matters even more than lighting, and flow directly produces dramatically better coloration and growth, there's just no way that they're going to sacrifice that for the aesthetic appeal of sand in the tank. They also strongly believe that a tank with sand will be a lot easier to get biologically stable in the first 8 to 12 months. However, from the 8 to 12 month mark on, there's no question that bare bottom tanks without sand are simpler, more stable to operate because they don't have to deal with all that crud that accumulates in the sand, and an issue that only compounds itself every year after that. Any tank the WWC team is going to set up is obviously going to be there much longer than 8 to 12 months, so the long-term results, simplicity and stability, always supersedes the more.
Pause this. Let me switch it to just action full up. Dun, 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 dun.
It's recording?
No.
Okay, we gotta make sure we
Let me put on the light actually. Right? Careful because the cord's right below you. There it is, there it is. Hold this for me a second. And then let's put this here. I gotta make sure that the, what is it, the utility doesn't fall into the water. What is it? The appliance.
The
right?
appliance. Oh, yeah.
Gotta make sure the appliance does not come in contact with the water.
Maybe you could install the power strip up higher.
No, we're good for right now. Then let me.
You know what I was thinking when it said
plug
that?
this bad boy in.
Imagine if you put all the cables through the back, like through here, look, and you did something where you installed the power strip right here. That way, there's no way water could ever get to it.
We're gonna be all set up for that. Ooh.
Wow.
And then this is the fluval one. There's the flow.
Oh my God, there it is. The beginning of your fish tank.
There's the flow.
Look at all that activity.
Look at all that flow. Look at all that flow.
Here, let's see.
Looks cool.
And then what's up with a little hole?
I'm gonna have to cover it one day.
One day during a water change?
Mm-hmm. I have to buy a filter basket that comes with a little plug for that.
But it's not going to affect anything now, right? It's just cosmetic?
No, it does suck water through there a little bit.
Because I was saying, what if you just stick a coral in there or like a...
No, because you gotta block it. It's gotta be blocked. We're gonna block it.
Day one?
No, not yet. It's day 0.
Day 0. So tomorrow night will be day 1.
Mm-hmm.
And a little C cup, bro. You did good.
I need to wash the glass.
Little Windex?
No.
Vinegar?
You can't use Windex on tanks at all. Please, baby. Never, ever. No. Not even close to it. Not on the dust that's around it. Nothing like that. 2 drops of Windex can kill the whole tank.
I bet.
No, just with the paper towel, like the inside, like all that sand and stuff that's in there. You see all that? That stuff.
Is that that's on the outside or the inside?
It's on the inside.
Oh, so you might need just a magnet brush?
I just get a paper towel.
And put your whole hand in there?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I have like a towel right there, but I'm using this paper towel. Okay. Da-na-na-na. It's full of water. Look at that. Wow. Full of water. Wow. I don't know. It's pretty awesome. I think I'm gonna cut the stream here. Oh, wait, no, we have to add the beneficial bacteria. Maybe we have to add the beneficial bacteria. I have to add the beneficial bacteria. Forgot. I know. 25 gallons. Concentrated live nitrifying bacteria. Rapidly cycles biofilters and corrects ammonia. Nitrate. So this treats 25 gallons. One ounce treats 25 gallons. 1 ounce. Directions. Shake bottle. Add 29 milliliters per 25 gallons of water. Add livestock after acclimating. Do not overcrowd tank. Do not overfeed. Test water parameters to decrease cycling time. Can be safely used 5 times recommended dosage. For fishless cycle, use ammonia chloride with fits fuel. So if it could be used 5 times, I mean, I could put this whole thing in there. I could use half of it too. Let's just kind of pour half of this in there. Shake it up. I guess there's this little window up here. Just pour it in this little window. Except it doesn't come out. Should be. I mean, it looks like just liquid. Oh, there it goes. Is that about half? It's about half. Maybe a little bit more. There you go. A little bit more than half. Where is the bottle cap? Where I put it? What in the world? Must have fallen. Yep, there it is. Boom! So there we go. We added Fritzzyme Turbo Start. This is what we added. And like I said, it's concentrated live nitrifying bacteria. It's a concentrated live saltwater specific nitrifying bacteria that naturally removes ammonia and nitrite. Turbo Start 700 is safe for all marine fish and vertebrates and plants. So this is like a good start. We'll probably add Bacter 7 in there too. This would be just to be extra safe, you know. Yeah. But it's going. I'll probably set up the app on the next stream for the heater. I might do it now because I got to do it anyway. So, but yeah, that's gonna be the next little fun project here on this thing. And I'm gonna turn off this light because we are doing a lights off cycle. 4 weeks, no lights, then lights turn on, then we go for it. All right. I was gonna go peace till the next stream, till the next episode.